Ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to have you back on Midnight Stories. So take a moment to unwind, sit back, and immerse yourself in the captivating tale that awaits. However, before we begin, I kindly ask for your support by giving us a like. The old logging road stretched out before me, a tunnel through the towering Douglas firs that dominated this remote corner of the Olympic National Forest. Raindrops pattered on the hood of my Forest Service pickup as I guided it around water-filled potholes, the only sounds those of the engine, the tires on gravel, and the rhythmic swish-swish of the wipers. I was headed deep into the wilderness to check on a report of an unauthorized structure on national forest land. Probably just an illegal hunting blind or fishing shack, but you never know. As a law enforcement ranger, it was my job to investigate, cite the owners if I could track them down, and dismantle and haul out whatever they'd built. I'd been a ranger for nearly 2 decades, the past 7 spent patrolling these dense woods and glacier-capped peaks towering above the Pacific. It's a lonely job, but I liked the solitude. Growing up on the Quileute Reservation on the Olympic coast, I was an outsider, a half-white, half-native kid never quite accepted by either world. I'd fled to the emptiness of the backcountry as soon as I was old enough, finding work on trail crews, fire lookouts, and ranger patrols. The forest accepted me as I was. My name is Tahoma, after the native name for Mount Rainier. Mom was a national park ranger there, and she liked to joke that she and the mountain were the only things big enough to tie down my Quileute father for more than one night. I grew up catching crickets in Rainier's spongy alpine meadows, fishing park streams, and dodging tourists in the Paradise parking lot. And after Dad left, it was just Mom and me, the mountain our constant backdrop. Now, at 35, I'd finally made my peace with the solitary ranger life. My creaky Forest Service cabin on the Bogachiel River was small and humble, but it kept the rain off. The pay was modest, but I didn't need much. Every day out here was an adventure. I was jolted from my thoughts by a sudden heavy thump from under my front tires. I braked to a halt and climbed out to investigate, grabbing my hard hat and tools. A flat tire. A big logging truck must have lost a chunk of tread. I sighed and set about wrestling the spare from under the truck bed. By the time I had the new tire on, I was soaked to the skin. Back in the cab, dripping on the upholstery, I continued up the logging road as it wound higher into the foothills, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle with the downpour. The truck rocked and bounced over the ruts and holes as I sipped coffee from a battered thermos. The drumming rain in the treetops swaying in the updrafts lulled me into a foggy trance until the radio crackled to life. "Ranger Tahoma, come in." The voice on the other end snapped with static. I pulled over and unclipped the handset. "This is Tahoma, over. We've got a report of a hysterical woman at the Ho Visitor Center babbling about her husband being attacked by an animal near Mount Tom Creek. Can you head over there and check it out?" I suppressed a groan. A domestic dispute in the backcountry, or worse. "Copy that. On my way now. ETA 90 minutes over." "Copy that, Tahoma. Keep us posted. Over and out." Cursing inwardly, I set down my thermos, flicked on the lights and sirens, and swung the pickup into a tire-spraying U-turn. So much for a quiet day with an easy case. But out here alone, things were rarely as simple as they seemed on the surface. The rain intensified as I gunned the pickup back down the logging road, standing water spraying in rooster tails from my tires. I swerved around a fallen tree limb, the truck fishtailing wildly before the tires caught again with a juddering thump. My stomach knotted with apprehension as I gripped the steering wheel and pushed the accelerator to the floor. Animal attacks were rare here, but not unheard of. The Olympic Mountains harbored robust populations of black bears and cougars. Every few years, an unfortunate hiker got too close to a cougar's kill or startled a bear with cubs. The results were usually ugly, but for a woman to abandon her injured husband and flee all the way to the visitor center, my gut told me something else was going on here. Rounding a bend, I had to swerve violently and stand on the brakes to avoid a figure stumbling down the middle of the road. A woman in a bright yellow rain slicker, waving her arms frantically. I jerked to a stop and she ran to my window shouting incoherently, her words whipped away by the whistling wind. Her face was ghostly pale, eyes wide with undiluted terror. I climbed out and grabbed her shoulders. "Ma'am, are you the one who reported your husband was attacked? I'm Ranger Tahoma. Can you tell me what happened?" She nodded jerkily, struggling for breath between panicked sobs. She pointed a quivering finger back up the road. It came out of nowhere, so big. It threw Josh like a rag doll. I think it killed him. Her voice rose to a hysterical shriek. I left him. Oh God, help me. I left him there. A chill went through me that had nothing to do with the rain. I bundled her into the passenger seat. Stay here, ma'am. Lock the doors and don't open them for anyone but me or another ranger, you hear? She nodded tightly, hugging herself. I hopped back behind the wheel, mind racing as I roared up the narrow road. A bear encounter didn't typically send hardened campers into hysterics. What had this couple seen that had the woman fleeing in blind panic, leaving her husband behind? The turnoff to Mount Tom Creek appeared quickly, and I swung down the even narrower dirt track. The creek is a popular spot for hikers and trout fishermen, with a small gravel parking area and trailhead. I pulled in and noted the sole vehicle present, a mud-spattered Subaru with a coexist bumper sticker. A backpack and a woman's hiking boots lay tumbled on the ground nearby. The windows were fogged and water droplets blurred my view inside. I climbed out into the downpour, sidearm unclipped and flashlight in hand. Water poured off the brim of my hat as I approached the car cautiously. My spine prickled with unease. A dark, coppery red smear on the fog-clouded window came into focus. I took a deep breath and rubbed at the glass with my sleeve. At the sight within, I instinctively jumped back with a shocked cry. The Subaru's passenger side window exploded outward. Something heavy and wet slammed into my chest with a hellish shriek, bowling me over. I landed hard on my back, driving the wind from my lungs. Claws scrabbled on my jacket. Yellow eyes blazed with feral madness above a blood-drenched muzzle that gaped in a banshee wail. The cougar was small for an adult male, maybe a young juvenile driven down from the high country by hunger. But it had a wiry, desperate strength. It lunged for my throat as I struggled to bring my weapon to bear. A thunderous boom rang out and the cougar's head snapped back, blood spraying across my face. Its body jerked once, then slumped heavily across my chest. Stunned, ears ringing, I lay there gulping for air. A figure stepped into view above me, lowering a still-smoking rifle. He was older, face weathered and creased under a battered Stetson. He stooped and heaved the dead cat off of me. "You okay there, Ranger Tahoma?" he asked in a gravelly rumble. He knew my name. I nodded shakily as he helped me sit up, staring at the gory sight before me. He glanced into the car and sighed. "That'd be Josh, I reckon. Damn shame. Looks like the cat got to him before the missus could run for help. Throat torn out. I fought to clear my head. Who are you? How'd you know to be here?" The old man met my gaze somberly. "Most folks call me Grim. I was out hunting mushrooms and heard the screams. But this weren't no cougar that scared that woman so badly, son." I looked at him sharply. "Then what was it?" "Nothing good." He nodded up at the brooding, mist-wreathed peaks. "There's things in these mountains, old things that don't much like company. You best watch your step up here." With that, he turned and vanished into the rain-lashed woods, leaving me staring after him as a growing sense of dread and bewilderment rose in my gut. What had I stumbled into here? One thing I knew for sure. My life would never be the same again. Grimm's words about old things that don't like company kept echoing through my head as I slogged back through the downpour to my pickup, the dead cougar slung over my shoulders. The old Quileute tribal elders used to talk in hushed tones about dangerous creatures and vengeful spirits that roamed the deep forests of the Olympic Peninsula. Towering, shaggy man-beasts, things neither human nor animal. As a kid, I'd always dismissed them as superstitious campfire stories, just like the old tales about the Quileutes being descended from shape-shifting wolves. But now, I heaved the cougar into the pickup bed with a grunt. The woman, whose name I'd learned was Sarah, peeked out at me fearfully through the rain-streaked side window. As gently as I could, I broke the news to her about her husband Josh. She dissolved into another bout of hysterical weeping. After some coaxing, I got a halting, tear-choked statement from her. She and Josh had been hiking the Mount Tom Creek trail when they rounded a bend and saw something. A huge, hair-covered shape slouching through the brush. It had frozen, staring at them with small sunken eyes and a strangely flat face before letting out a shattering roar. Josh had yelled at her to run as the thing barreled toward them with terrifying speed. That was the last she saw of him. The story gave me chills, even as my rational mind rejected it. There was no way something like that could exist undetected in this day and age. The cougar I could believe, a tragic and rare but wholly natural occurrence. But a giant, hairy hominid straight out of campfire stories? Impossible. Poor Sarah must have seen the big cat and panicked, her mind playing tricks on her. The trauma of finding Josh's body could have only magnified her confused memories, and yet, something about the sheer visceral terror in Sarah's voice as she described the creature unsettled me. I thought about the smashed-out car window, the blood smear. A cougar ambushing its prey from a tree wouldn't have left that evidence. What had really happened here? I pushed the questions aside as I got back on the radio to the ranger station to report the situation. Soon, reinforcements arrived, sheriff's deputies to deal with Josh's body, a trauma counselor for Sarah. At their insistence, I rode back down with them to give a statement. By the time the paperwork was done, night had fallen, and I was fighting back jaw-cracking yawns, my adrenaline crash hitting hard. I was just climbing back into my pickup when my radio crackled to life again. Dispatch relaying reports of strange lights and sounds near where I'd found Josh's body. Now what? Cursing inwardly, I swung back onto the road and headed into the night-shrouded hills once again. Winding up the narrow track in pitchy darkness, I almost didn't see the hulking shape that materialized out of the mist until I was nearly on top of it. I hit the brakes hard, truck skidding to a rocking halt. My headlights captured a pair of stilt-like, hair-shrouded legs. They rose to a barrel chest and long, thickly muscled arms that hung below the creature's knees. Its head seemed to sit directly on its shoulders, no appreciable neck. I gaped in awestruck horror at the not-quite-human face, heavy brow ridges, deep-set eyes glinting with feral cunning, a disturbingly human nose above a thin, lipless slash of a mouth. The creature regarded me for a moment with what I swore was dark amusement. Then it turned, and with an agility and speed that belied its bulk, it loped into the forest and vanished. I sat frozen for an eternity, hands welded to the steering wheel, heart jackhammering against my ribs. It couldn't be real. My exhausted brain playing tricks, just like Sarah. There was no such thing as Bigfoot. There couldn't be. But how to explain the footprints sunk deep into the muddy track, far too big to be human, or the coarse brown hair snagged on a nearby huckleberry bush? All the old stories rushed back, the man-beasts, the Sasquatch, the stick Indians. What if it was all true? What exactly was I dealing with out here? One thing was certain. Those old bones in the ranger station weren't going to cut it anymore. I was going to need help, and answers. But who would believe me? Where could I even start? As if on cue, my radio crackled to life again, making me jump. I fumbled for the handset with shaking hands. "Tahoma, you there?" A familiar grizzled voice. "Grim. How is he?" Yeah, I'm here." "You saw it, didn't you?" A cold knot formed in my gut. "Saw what?" I hedged. "Don't play dumb with me, boy. You know damn well what. Ol' Mossback himself. The skookum." I can't." A note of desperation crept into my voice. "Listen to me carefully now. This is bigger than you know, bigger than you can handle alone. I can help you, but we need to talk. Face to face. Meet me at my place up on Mosquito Ridge. I'll explain everything." But how will I find you?" "Just follow the sound of my dogs." With that, the radio went dead, leaving me with nothing but the drumming rain, the idling engine, and a whole host of new, terrifying questions. What exactly had I gotten myself into? I hunched over the steering wheel, peering through the windshield into the mist-shrouded night as I bounced and jounced up the muddy, rutted track that led to Mosquito Ridge. Every shadow seemed to conceal a lurking threat, every gust of wind through the towering evergreens carrying a menacing hiss. My nerves were strung tighter than piano wire. What was I doing out here, chasing the cryptic words of a grizzled stranger to a remote mountain homestead in the dead of night? It went against every bit of my ranger training, every ounce of common sense, but Grim knew something about the creature I'd seen. The look in his eyes when he talked about it, a mixture of reverence and dread, told me that much. If this thing was real, if the old stories were true, then as a ranger sworn to protect these lands and the people who visited them, I needed to understand what I was dealing with. Terrifying as that prospect was, A sudden flash of eyes in my headlights made me stomp the brakes reflexively. 3 rangy shapes loped out of the brush, long legs eating up the ground in fluid, distance-devouring strides. Wolves, big ones, shaggy and rough-coated. They angled across the road in front of me and vanished up the hill. Following them at a distance was a shabbier figure, limping and skulking as if reluctant to leave the shadows. A coyote. Grimm's hounds. Had to be. Pulse still racing, I shifted back into gear and trundled after them. The road switchbacked up the flank of the ridge, overhung by massive shadowed trunks and drooping boughs. Cresting a final rise, my headlights picked out a rough-hewn pole gate standing slightly ajar. Beyond it squatted a low, bark-shingled cabin, golden light bleeding from a single small window. A curl of wood smoke drifted from the stone chimney. I pulled up short of the gate and killed the engine. In the sudden silence, the night pressed in close, alive with small rustling sounds and the whisper of damp wind through fir needles. I blew out a long breath and climbed down from the cab, one hand resting on the butt of my sidearm. As I approached the gate, a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye made me whirl, unsnapping my holster. One of the shaggy shapes from the road was slipping through the fence rails, but it was no wolf I saw now. It moved with a fluid, loping grace on 4 legs, but something about the shape of the head, the almost human cast to its features, made my skin prickle. As it turned to look back at me, I swore I saw intelligence in its yellow eyes. Then it melted into the shadows and was gone. Shaking off a shudder, I pushed through the gate, wincing as it creaked loudly. A dozen paces brought me to the door. I raised a fist to knock, and nearly jumped out of my skin as it swung open before I could. "About time you showed up," Grimm grunted. He stood backlit in the doorway, a black cutout shape against the warm lantern glow. "Well, come on then, we got work to do." I hesitated briefly, some last shred of self-preservation making me wonder if walking into a strange cabin in the woods in the middle of the night was really the smartest move. But I'd come this far. I stepped over the threshold and stopped short again, staring. Every wall was hung with a bizarre assortment of artifacts, animal skins and skulls, woven reed figures, painted masks, claws and teeth and bones strung on cords. Bundles of dried herbs and flowers dangled from the ceiling beams, filling the room with a heady, acrid smell. It looked like a cross between a natural history museum and a voodoo shrine. Grimm shut the door behind me with a thump. In the light, I finally got a clear look at him. He was older than I'd first guessed, face deeply lined under the shadow of his hat, skin weathered to the consistency of old leather. Salt and pepper stubble coated his sunken cheeks. His flinty eyes glittered with a strange blend of weariness and manic intensity. He followed my gaze around the room. "Protection," he said cryptically. "Wards against unnatural intrusions. This cabin sits at the heart of an active region." I wet my lips, still trying to process what I was seeing. "What is all this? What's going on?" Grimm crossed to a battered wood stove and busied himself with a battered aluminum coffee pot. "You've had a glimpse behind the veil now, son. Seen the truth that hides behind the corners of most men's eyes. The old stories, the legends, they ain't just stories." He turned and pinned me with that unsettling stare. "Folks call me Grimm on account of me collecting all these old tales, but I don't just collect 'em, I live 'em." I struggled to wrap my head around that. "So you're saying, what, exactly? That thing I saw on the road?" "The skookum," Grimm supplied. "Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Stick Indian. Goes by a lot of names, but I can tell you this. It's old and it's powerful, and just seeing it means it wanted to be seen. You've been touched, Ranger Tahoma." A chill wormed its way up my spine. Touched, what does that mean? Means you're part of this thing now, like it or not. Sasquatch don't show itself lightly. You got the gift of the people in your blood, too. I can tell. Quilut? I felt poleaxed. "How did you—" Grimm waved a dismissive hand. "Boy, think about what you just saw on that road. Then ask yourself if an old kook in a shack knowing your tribe ought to be the thing that surprises you." Point taken. I drew a shaky breath. "So what does this skookum want with me?" "That I don't rightly know, but you can damn well bet we need to find out. Won't be good, whatever it is." Grimm jerked his chin at the window, where the wolves, if that's truly what they were, prowled restlessly through the murk. "Keep watch on them critters out there. Familiars, watchers, spies for the dark things, more afoot in these woods than you can reckon. Skinwalkers stalk the shadows, witches ride the night winds. Forgotten gods and horrors older than time stir in their sleep. His words carried the ring of prophecy, of grim surety, hard-won through bitter experience. I felt like I'd stumbled into an impossible hidden world, a world I was suddenly a part of, whether I wanted to be or not. Grim banged 2 tin mugs down on the rough table and sloshed coffee into them. The burnt scent mingled queasily with the herbal funk. He pushed 1 mug to me and leveled a finger in my face. "Mark this, boy. You're in the deep end now. This ain't no fairy story. The stakes are high as life itself. You want to survive, you stick with me and mind what I tell you. We're going to get some answers, you and me, and God help us with what we find." He threw back his coffee like a shot of whiskey and fixed me with a look as black and unfathomable as the night-cloaked forest outside. "Saddle up, Ranger Tahoma. We're going hunting." I followed Grim out into the damp night air in a daze of confusion and trepidation. My mind spun with the implications of everything I'd seen and heard in the past few hours. The world seemed to yaw and shift around me, all my comfortable certainties crumbling away to reveal vistas of dark mystery and lurking horror. Grim strode ahead, a battery-powered lantern in one gnarled hand throwing fitful shadows. The other gripped a battered hunting rifle with an ease that spoke of long familiarity. His dogs, if you could call those unsettling, not quite wolf things dogs, flitted through the brush on either side, yellow eyes catching the lantern light. "Keep up, boy," Grim growled over his shoulder, "and watch your step. Trail's tetchy in the dark." I hurried my pace, barking my shin on a route I couldn't see in time. "Where are we going? What's the plan here?" "The plan," Grim said without turning, "is to get a look at these track signs, gather us some intel on what exactly we're dealing with. Maybe set some traps if the ground lays right. Sasquatch itself could be anywhere, but it'll leave plenty of sign." "How do you know so much about these things?" Grim gave a short, mirthless bark of a laugh. "Let's just say I've had occasion to tangle with them before, more times than I care to recollect. They ain't something you forget." He spat into the brush, expression sour. "Damned Squatch has been a burr under my saddle longer'n you've been drawing breath. Reason I made it my life's work to find out everything I could about him, and the other critters like him." One of the dogs drifted closer, nearly brushing my leg. I fought not to shy away. "Other critters? You mean like what I saw before, by the gate?" "Yup, skinwalkers, witches, all manner of unnatural beasties. You'd be purely astounded at what all lurks out in the wild places." He glanced at me sidelong, though maybe not so astounded anymore, eh? I had no response to that. We crunched along in silence, the night alive with small rustling sounds. I was acutely aware of my rifle slung over my shoulder, a comforting weight. But what good would it do me against the kind of creatures Grim was describing? My palms felt clammy on the strap. "Hold up." Grim raised a hand, silencing my footfalls and my racing thoughts alike. He knelt, peering at the needle-strewn ground, trailing his fingertips over some disturbance I couldn't make out. "Tracks, right where your lady friend saw her hubby get snatched." I squinted at the matted duff. Now that he pointed it out, I could just discern the outline of a print. Far too large to be human, sunk deep into the loam, and with a clear impression of toes, long, grasping toes like a great ape, or like no animal I'd ever seen. I thought of that hulking figure in the road, all coiled menace and glinting dark eyes, and my stomach knotted. Still fresh. Grim rose, brushing off his knees. Few hours old at most, could still be close by. "What do we do?" To my shame, I couldn't keep a tremor from my voice. Grim heard it. He turned, fixing me with a look that was almost pitying. "You get hold of yourself, for starters. Fear's natural, but you let it rule you out here. You're worse than useless. Dangerous." I swallowed hard and nodded, fingers tightening on my rifle strap. I was a park ranger, damn it. I'd faced down bears, criminals, life-threatening accidents. I could handle this. Had to. Grim jerked his chin off the trail toward a dense tangle of underbrush and vine maple. His dogs were nosing around the edges, hackles up. "Trail leads off that way, into the thick. If it's still around, that's where it'll be." Off trail? My gut clenched at the thought of leaving the marginally reassuring path and plunging into that knotted mass of shadows. Yep, Sasquatch don't exactly stick to the maintained routes, but I won't make you go in there blind. He fished in a pocket and came up with 2 objects. The first was a small cloth bag on a string, which he tossed to me. It was surprisingly heavy and gave off a pungent, spicy smell even through the fabric. "Gree bag," Grim said as I hefted it uncertainly. "Protective charm, old bayou magic. Won't stop a rampaging squatch, but it could turn aside the evil eye or a witch's hex. Keep it close." I looped the string around my neck, feeling a little foolish and a lot out of my depth. Grim held up the other object, a small glass vial full of a viscous green liquid that seemed to fluoresce faintly in the lantern light. "This here's a lure. Sasquatch musk glands and such like, concentrated. Drives 'em wild." He unstoppered the vial and my sinuses instantly clogged with an eye-watering reek, like rotting leaves mixed with skunk spray and a cloying, musky undertone. I gagged and Grim quickly recorked it, grinning sharply. "Stuff's fierce. We'll set us up some scent traps, try to draw the beastie in." He sobered, fixing me with a hard stare. "You still with me on this, son? Ain't no shame in backing out. This is a dark and dangerous road we're walking." I met his eyes steadily, summoning what courage I had. This was my forest, my responsibility. If there was a threat to the people under my protection, I had to face it. "I'm with you." Grim studied me a moment longer, then nodded once, as if satisfied. "Then let's get hunting." He turned and plunged off the trail, his hounds flowing after him like shadows. I hefted my rifle and followed, that sense of dread mingling with a strange, rising exhilaration. I was walking into the unknown, into a world I'd never truly imagined existed. I had no idea what I was doing or what I was about to face, but one way or another, I was going to get some answers. I just prayed I was ready for them. The world away from the trail was a tangled maze of blowdowns and dense brush, all of it dripping with damp. Grim moved through it like a wraith, hardly seeming to disturb a branch or leaf. I tried my best to emulate his silent passage and avoid the snags and tripwires of roots, with mixed success. Every snapped twig and swishing brushstroke sounded thunderous to my straining ears, each scrape of bark against my slicker as loud as a shout. My nerves were twanging like banjo strings, raw and resonant. I found myself jumping at shadows, gasping at imagined movements in the corner of my eye. That sense of unseen gazes on my back, prickling my nape. Was it just my shot nerves playing tricks, or something more? After a few minutes that felt like eons, Grim paused, holding up a hand for stillness. I froze, heart hammering against my ribs so hard I was certain he must hear it. He knelt and busied himself at the base of a sprawling hemlock, eyes intent on his work. When he rose, I saw he'd wedged the little vial of Sasquatch musk into the roots concealed by a flap of bark. As he recorked it, that eye-watering stink flooded out again before being mercifully stoppered. Grim met my gaze, mouth set in a grim line. "Scent traps set. Now we find us a place to hunker down and wait." We crept on through the dripping fir shade, Grim setting another musk trap every few dozen yards. I tried to fix the locations in my mind, glancing back to memorize landmarks, but the trees crowded close and confusing. The forest in the dark was a uniform pelt of shadows, thick and disorienting. I had to trust in Grim's uncanny woodscraft to lead us back out again, if we made it that far. At last, Grim halted in a small hollow, ringed with the squat bulk of vine maples, and carpeted in dry drifts of their fallen leaves. He settled to the ground, rifle across his knees, and motioned for me to do the same. "Now what?" I asked in a whisper that still felt too loud in the bloated silence. "Now we wait and watch." So we waited, and we watched. The night pressed close around us, gravid with small rustling lives and skirling breezes and 100 other innocuous noises that took on shades of menace and portent in that inky void. My eyes strained against the dark until bright worms swam in my vision, and every shifting shadow took on hulking, monstrous proportions. Time blurred and stretched, an endless purgatory of black unease. The cold sank into my bones, chilling me in a way that had little to do with the night's damp. My mind gnawed at itself, all pent-up doubts and formless terrors sharpening their teeth on my raw nerves. An eternity later, Grim stirred beside me. I twisted to look at him, not daring to speak. He was staring intently off into the jumbled dark, body wire-taut with a sudden watchful tension, and then I heard it too, a soft snuffling noise underpinned by a low rhythmic grunting, like the idle of some great beast. Slowly, tortuously, I turned to peer in the direction of the sound. At first there was nothing but blackness swimming with phantom after-images. Then a shape moved between the trees, coalescing out of the shadows as if born from them. It stood upright on two massive legs, arms like tree trunks hanging to its knees. Its shaggy bulk seemed to fill the spaces between the firs, dwarfing them. From its bullet head shone two feral red sparks of eyes, windows into a fathomless primitive cunning. It raised its snout to the wind, testing the air in great snuffling inhales. Then it went preternaturally still, only those hell-pit eyes roving. I felt the weight of that blood-red gaze pass over me, heavy as a branding iron, and had to clench my jaw against a whimper. Beside me, grim was a statue, only the barest rise and fall of his chest showing he still breathed. I could feel the tension radiating off him like heat shimmer. His finger, laid alongside the rifle's trigger guard, trembled once before steadying. The Sasquatch took a step forward, leaves crackling under its splayed feet. Its head swung low and side to side as if casting for a scent. Another ponderous step. It was coming straight towards us, following the lure of the musk Grim had planted. My pulse roared in my ears, thudding in time with those monstrous footfalls. It filled my world, that onrushing slab of primal wildness, the stink of its bestial musk cutting through even the reek of our lures. This was an elder power of the wild places, raw and unutterably savage, and we were less than insects before it. 20 yards, 15. I could see details now, the matted sheen of its fur, the scars and bare patches crisscrossing its rolling shoulders and chest. Lips curled back from yellowed fangs in a permanent snarl, ropes of drool swinging. 10 yards. Grim's rifle twitched, almost imperceptibly. I fought the urge to scream, to run, knowing it would be futile. We were deer in headlights, paralyzed before onrushing doom. 5 yards. The stink was choking, overpowering. I gagged on a throat full of bile. The beast was close enough to touch now, close enough to feel the heat blasting off its hulking body. A piercing whistle split the night. The Sasquatch reared back with a startled grunt, shaggy head swiveling. One of Grim's dogs flashed out of the darkness beyond it in a pale blur, darting in to nip at the monster's tree stump ankle. The Sasquatch roared, a sound like a rock slide and a thunderclap and an avalanche all at once, and swatted at the dog with a fist the size of a ham. It missed, the dog dancing easily aside, and then the other two were there, rushing in to harry it from both sides. Grim was on his feet, all coiled powers suddenly unsprung. "Run, boy!" I didn't need to be told twice. I leapt up and plunged into the trees, heedless of direction, knowing only that I had to get away, that I was infinitely tiny and fragile before that roaring engine of destruction thrashing its way free of the harrying dogs behind me. Branches slapped at my face, my arms catching at my clothes, roots snagged my ankles, pitching me headlong. I bounced off a trunk and floundered on, breath sawing in my lungs, pulse a staccato drumroll in my temples. I had no thought but mindless flight, the imperative of prey before predator. Fetching up hard against the scaly bark of a massive fir, I clung to it, gasping, shaking uncontrollably. Sweat and icy dew ran into my eyes, blurring my vision. I swiped at my face, trying to slow the sobbing heave of my lungs. Grim loped up soundlessly beside me, eyes alight with manic glee, looking like a coyote who'd just raided a henhouse. His rifle was still in his hands, and I saw for the first time the long, wicked knife strapped to his other hip. "Hell of a thing, huh?" His voice fairly thrummed with excitement. "Never seen one that close before. Never figured to get the chance, tell true." "Are you crazy?" I hissed, my own voice cracking with strain. "We could have been killed. We've got to get out of here now." Grim cocked his head, listening to the crackle and thrash of the Sasquatch bulling its way off through the trees some distance away, still pursued by his tireless dogs. He shook his head slowly. "Nah, son, we're just getting started. This here's a real opportunity, and I mean to make the most of it. Ever occur to you to wonder why that devil went to the trouble to show himself to you? To mark you out?" I just stared at him, uncomprehending. What did it matter why the monster had appeared? It was here, it was real, and it was more terrifying than any sane mind could conceive. What more did we need to know? Grim's grin was fierce. "Fey. It's got plans for you, boy. For us. and we're going to find out what they are." "Oh, yes, we are." He laughed then, a wild, exultant sound that made the small hairs on my nape prickle and stand erect. In that moment he looked scarcely less feral and savage than the monster we pursued. I sagged back against the chill, clammy bark of the fir, knees watery. My mind spun, black spots swimming before my eyes as reaction took its toll. And yet, through the fog of exhaustion and terror, a small, bright coal of something else kindled to life. Curiosity, wonder, and yes, exhilaration. I'd walked the hidden trails beyond the veil of the workaday world, and nothing would ever look quite the same again. The shadows teemed with mystery and danger and wild, impossible things, and part of me longed to know their secrets. Gods help me, I wanted to know. Grim saw it in my face, and his grin sharpened knowingly. He clapped me on the shoulder. "Attaboy, Ranger Tahoma. Looks like you just might have a little salt in you after all. What do you say we go get us some answers?" I drew a deep, shuddering breath and pushed off the tree. My hands still shook, my heart still jackhammered against my ribs, but my voice was steady as I met his glittering gaze. "Lead on." And with that we plunged back into the unknown, following the trail of the monster, the mystery that had marked me for its own. Whatever world-shaking revelation lay at the end of this black road, I was committed now. Win or lose, I'd see it through. I just prayed my curiosity wouldn't be the death of me. But if it was, hell, there were worse ways to go. They say the wilderness has a way of testing a man, pushing him to his limits. I've spent the last 15 years as a park ranger, and I've seen my share of what the untamed wild can do. But nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered that fateful summer of 2018. My name is Takota, a name passed down by my Choctaw ancestors meaning friend to all. Perhaps it was my heritage that drew me to a life in the outdoors, feeling a kinship with the land and a duty to protect it. Or maybe I just wanted to get away from the chaos of modern life. Either way, it led me to take a ranger position at Olympic National Park. I remember the day I arrived, a heavy mist clinging to the dense forest of Sitka spruce and western hemlock. The air was damp and earthy. A light drizzle dampened my jet-black hair as I drove up the winding road to the small cabin that would be my home. It wasn't much, a simple one-room structure with a wood stove for heat and a small generator for power. But it suited me just fine. The first few weeks were quiet as I settled into my routine, maintaining trails, assisting the occasional hiker, and relishing the solitude. But then the reports started coming in, whisperings at first that quickly grew. Campers claiming to hear strange noises in the night, eerie howls that made their blood run cold. Enormous footprints found near their tents, food and gear mysteriously disappearing. I shrugged it off at first. Black bears weren't uncommon in these parts, but something about it nagged at me, an unshakable feeling in my gut that there was more to the story. I decided to dig a little deeper, spending my off hours poring over old newspapers and historical records in the ranger station. That's when I discovered the legends, tales passed down by the indigenous tribes of the Pacific Northwest for generations. Stories of an elusive creature who roamed the forest, taller than a man and covered in dark hair. The Lumi people called him Tsemiquis, the Salish named him Sasquatch, but he was best known by another name whispered around campfires, Bigfoot. I leaned back in my chair, my mind reeling. Could the stories be true? Were the recent disturbances the work of some unidentified animal, or was something more sinister at play? I had no idea of the nightmare that lay ahead for me in those misty woods. The sightings continued as the summer wore on, each one stranger than the last. A family of hikers claimed a dark figure paralleled them for miles just inside the tree line. A couple camping at Graves Creek swore a large hairy hand reached inside their tent as they slept. A Boy Scout troop had to be evacuated by helicopter after half their food disappeared, and they found a trail of gigantic humanoid prints circling their campsite. I documented each incident meticulously, mapping the locations and interviewing the witnesses myself. A pattern began to emerge. The epicenter seemed to be the vast wilderness of the Hoh rainforest. Densely carpeted in moss and ferns, the Hoh was one of the lushest and most primeval corners of Olympic. If something was out there, I had a hunch that's where it would be. I started taking solo treks deep into the Hoh, telling myself it was just to get a lay of the land. But if I'm being honest, a part of me wanted to see if the stories were true. Call it morbid curiosity or foolhardy bravado, but I was determined to uncover the truth behind the sightings. At first, my explorations yielded little more than mosquito bites and sore feet. But about 2 weeks in, I had a chance encounter that chilled me to my core. I was hiking along the Hoh River Trail, dense thickets of vine maple and herbs of wood flanking the path. The forest was draped in its usual misty veil, an eerie stillness broken only by the occasional roar of the glacial river. I rounded a bend and froze, the hairs on the back of my neck rising. There in the middle of the trail was an enormous humanoid footprint impressed deep into the soft loam. It had to be at least 18 inches long and nearly as wide, dwarfing my own hiking boot. A pungent, musky odor hung heavy in the air. Heart-hammering, I crouched down to examine the track. It looked fresh, the edges crisp and defined. Then I noticed a second print and a third. An entire trail of them headed off into the undergrowth and vanished into the shadowy green. A twig snapped somewhere off to my left, and I spun around, my hand instinctively going for the bear spray on my belt. But I saw nothing in the wall of foliage except the gentle sway of sword ferns. Unnerved, I started to back away slowly, not taking my eyes off the tree line. That's when I heard it, a low guttural groan that made my blood turn to ice in my veins. I'm not too proud to admit it. I ran, a full-on panicked sprint back the way I'd come. I didn't stop until I reached the trailhead, lungs burning and legs trembling beneath me. Later, a wave of shame washed over me for giving in to my fears so easily. But in that moment, an almost primal instinct took hold of me, a sense that I was not alone in those woods, and that I was not welcome. I barely slept a wink that night, my mind replaying the events in the Hoh on an endless loop. I kept seeing that footprint, smelling that awful musty stench, and the memory of that eerie groan echoing through the trees sent shivers down my spine. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I radioed the head ranger, requesting permission to stake out one of the research cabins at Dodger Point with a wildlife camera. If something was prowling the Hoh, I was determined to catch a glimpse of it. He granted my request, but I could hear the hesitation in his voice. "Just be careful out there, Dakota," he warned. "We've lost people in that forest before." I assured him I would take every precaution, but his words stuck with me as I hiked the 12 miles to the cabin the next day, 50 pounds of camera gear on my back. Dodger Point was as remote as it got, the pyramid-shaped roof peeking out above a sea of conifers. The nearest road was 8 miles north, and the only other structure for miles was a ranger station that had been shuttered since the 90s. As I settled in, I couldn't shake the eerie sensation of being watched, as if the very trees had eyes. Every rustle of brush or snap of a twig made me jump. I chalked it up to nerves and sleep deprivation. After all, I was letting local legends get to my head. There was no such thing as Bigfoot, right? I set up the remote camera along a well-used game trail near the cabin, rigging it with a motion sensor. If anything larger than a raccoon passed by, I'd have hard evidence. All there was left to do was wait, and so I did, in the oppressive silence of that backwoods cabin. Minutes turned to hours, and hours into days. Boredom mingled with a creeping sense of isolation and unease. On the third night, I jolted awake to a sound outside the cabin, the distinctive snap and crackle of a large creature moving through the underbrush. The hairs on my arms stood at attention, and my heart began to race. Slowly, I reached for the bear spray next to my cot, eyes straining against the inky black pressing in from the unshuttered windows. Then I heard it, a low, warbling whoop, unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It started off almost mournful, like a loon's call, but quickly rose in pitch and volume into a shrill, blood-curdling scream. The sound seemed to scrape against the inside of my skull, flooding my veins with ice. I huddled there in the dark, too terrified to move, barely daring to breathe. An eternity seemed to pass before the shrieks faded back into the night. I didn't dare turn on the floodlight to look outside, worried whatever had made that ungodly sound might still be out there. At dawn's first light, I packed up my gear and made the long, shaky hike back to my cabin. I told myself it was just a movie, perhaps an elk bugling, but I couldn't fully convince myself. Some primordial instinct told me I'd heard the howl of a predator, of something ancient and feral and very much real. I almost didn't want to check the camera. I feared what I might see. But I had to know the truth. With trembling fingers, I inserted the SD card into my laptop, clicking through grainy black and white photos of foxes and deer until I reached the timestamp from last night. What I saw made my blood run cold. There, towering in the center of the frame, was an enormous humanoid figure caught in mid-stride. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, its body covered in shaggy, dark hair. But it was the face that sent a chill down my spine, a pair of gleaming eyes staring straight into the camera lens below a heavy brow, a face that was distinctly human, and yet not. After seeing the photo, there was no denying it anymore. The creature was real. Bigfoot was real, and it was out there in the woods, possibly watching me at that very moment. I spent the next few days holed up in my cabin, jumping at every creak and groan of the old timber frame. I knew I should report my discovery, turn over the evidence, but something held me back. A nagging fear that once word got out, these ancient woods would be crawling with hunters and TV crews, all desperate for a piece of the legend. On some level, I felt a strange kinship with the creature. It was a being caught between two worlds, neither animal nor man, an outsider. Maybe that's why I decided to track it on my own first, to understand its true nature before the inevitable media circus descended. Call it native intuition, but I had a gut feeling I knew where to start my search. Grave Creek. Nearly all the major sightings had occurred within a 5-mile radius of the campground, and I'd noticed a pattern in the reports. They seemed to spike in the week leading up to the full moon, as if the creature's activity was tied to the lunar cycle. The next full moon was only a few days away. I spent the meantime preparing, gathering supplies, and studying topographical maps of the area. When the appointed night arrived, I set out into the woods under a swollen yellow moon, armed with only my wits and a camera. I'd barely been hiking an hour when I stumbled across the first sign, a sapling snapped cleanly in two, 7 feet up the trunk. The surrounding vegetation was trampled, broken branches littering the forest floor. Something big had passed through here, something strong. Heart-pounding, I followed the trail of destruction deeper into the timber. The woods seemed to close around me, ancient hemlocks blotting out the moonlight. An oppressive hush filled the air, broken only by the occasional skitter of small creatures fleeing my passage. And then I saw it. There in the underbrush, caught on a snarl of twigs, was a tuft of long brown hair. I crouched down to examine my find, rolling the coarse strands between my fingertips. It was unlike anything I'd seen before, too thick and wiry to belong to any of the usual forest inhabitants. A wave of excitement mingled with fear washed over me. I was close. Suddenly, a piercing shriek shattered the silence, emanating from a steep ravine up ahead. It was the same chilling cry I'd heard outside the cabin, but this time it sounded pained. Against my better judgment, I crashed through the brush toward the sound, blood roaring in my ears. I reached the edge of the ravine and peered down into the shadows. At the bottom, caught in a tangle of rusty barbed wire, was the creature. It thrashed and howled, dark blood matting its fur. Its leg was ensnared in the wire, the flesh beneath torn and oozing. But it was the eyes that held me transfixed. Glowing yellow in the moonlight, they held an unmistakable look of anguish and pleading. In that moment, my fear evaporated, replaced by an overwhelming surge of compassion. This was no monster, no bloodthirsty abomination. It was a living being, one that was hurt and suffering. Before I knew what I was doing, I was skidding down the steep embankment, heedless of the rocks that bit into my palms. The creature tensed as I approached, a low warning growl rumbling in its massive chest. But I kept my movements slow and deliberate, keeping my gaze locked with those pain-bright eyes as I whispered soft words of comfort. "Easy now. I'm here to help. You're going to be okay." Up close, the creature's form was both intimidating and magnificent. Its sheer size was breathtaking, shoulders level with my head even as it lay prone. I marveled at the corded muscles rippling under its pelt, the raw power contained in every limb. But more than that, I was struck by the undeniable spark of intelligence shining out from its eyes. This was a thinking, feeling being, one utterly undeserving of the centuries of fear and persecution heaped upon it. Slowly, so slowly, I inched my hands toward the tangled wire, murmuring a steady stream of reassurances. To my shock, the creature made no move to lash out or flee. It simply watched me work, grunting softly as I carefully unwound the barbs from its leg. As the last loop of wire fell away, the air rushed from the creature's lungs in an unmistakable sigh. I rocked back on my heels, suddenly realizing what I'd done. I was face to face with the most elusive cryptid in North American history, the embodiment of thousands of years of legend. And all I could think was that I'd never seen a creature more beautiful or more profoundly misunderstood. Gingerly, the creature pulled itself to its feet, favoring its wounded leg. It towered over me, eclipsing the moon. For a long moment, we simply stared at one another, an unspoken understanding passing between us. And then, with a soft huff, it turned and lumbered off into the shadowed tree line. I remained kneeling there in the ravine for a long time, marveling at the encounter. My hands shook and my mind reeled. In one night, everything I thought I knew about the world had been turned on its head. There were mysteries in these ancient woods, wonders beyond human understanding. I knew then that I could never share what I'd seen. The world wasn't ready for the truth. Maybe it never would be. But I had been granted a glimpse behind the veil, and I would spend the rest of my days guarding that secret, and guarding him, the big man of the woods, my friend. May he forever roam free and unbothered in the wild places of this earth. In the days and weeks following my encounter, I became a man obsessed. I pored over every historical account and indigenous legend I could get my hands on, trying to piece together the real story of the Sasquatch. I learned that sightings dated back centuries, permeating the oral histories of nearly every Pacific Northwest tribe. The Lumi spoke of Tsemeques, the wild men who dwelled in the high country. The Salish had stories of Sasquatch, the hairy giants who roamed the forests. And the Wenatchee told of Coanito, a race of mountain giants who kept to the wild places. Most compelling of all were the stories that painted these creatures not as bloodthirsty monsters, but as guardians of the forest, beings who lived in harmony with nature, only turning aggressive when their territory was threatened. The more I read, the more convinced I became that I hadn't just had a chance encounter in the woods that night. I'd been entrusted with a sacred duty to protect these ancient beings and the wilderness they called home. I threw myself into my ranger work with newfound zeal, arguing loudly for expanded protections for the region's old-growth forests at every budget and policy meeting. I led trail maintenance crews deep into the backcountry, rerouting paths around what I now knew to be prime Sasquatch habitat. And on my off days, I returned to those hidden groves, leaving offerings of food as a sign of goodwill. As the years rolled by, I kept my secret, never breathing a word of what I'd seen to another living soul. Even as the sightings continued and the local legends grew, I held my tongue. I knew the truth now, that these creatures meant us no harm, that they were a vital part of the forest's delicate ecosystem, perhaps the last remnants of a time before human civilization and its destruction. But for all my efforts, the outside world finally found its way into the heart of the Olympic wilderness. A tech billionaire bought up a huge swath of forest on the edge of the national park, intending to build a sprawling vacation lodge and ski resort. The development would level hundreds of acres of pristine woodland and several sighting hotspots. I argued against the project until I was blue in the face, but money talked louder than one park ranger's protests. Construction was slated to begin in the spring. I was devastated, haunted by images of bulldozers and chainsaws tearing through the creature's ancient home. I spent that final winter in a state of grim determination, logging long, frigid hours, tracking the creature's movements, mapping the most remote corners of its habitat. If I couldn't stop the destruction, the least I could do was try to prepare it, to give it a head start to escape into the deeper wilds. But the big wild man proved elusive as ever. Weeks went by without a sign. Then, on the eve of the spring equinox, I found it. A trail of those unmistakable prints in the slush, meandering up the flank of a nameless peak. I followed them for hours, lungs burning and hands numb. Near the summit, they disappeared into the mouth of a cave half hidden behind a tumble of scree. Heart pounding, I stepped inside, the beam of my headlamp falling across damp stone walls. The air was thick and musky, heavy with the creature's familiar wild scent. My light glinted off something in the shadows, a pile of bones, I realized with a thrill of fear. Elk, deer, black bear, bigger prey than I'd imagined it taking. Then I saw the cub. It was curled against the far wall, its fur a lighter brown than the adult's. It blinked up at me with drowsy, curious eyes, unafraid, and huddled behind it, watching me with a wary, protective gaze. The big wild man itself. Understanding hit me like a freight train. This was no mere den, it was a nursery, and if the scattered remains were any indicator, this new mother would kill to defend it. Slowly I backed out of the cave, my heart aching. In the morning the construction crews would arrive. The noise, the destruction, it would send the creature into a frenzy. I couldn't let that happen. Clutching the radio at my belt, I made a decision, one that would change the course of my life forever. That night I made 2 calls. The first was to the head ranger, claiming an emergency need for immediate evacuation. The second was to the local news station. Then I sat back and watched as one of the biggest wildfires in Pacific Northwest history ate its way across the peninsula. Some said it was a freak lightning strike. Others whispered about arson. Only I knew the truth, that I had sparked it myself. In the chaos of smoke and flames, no one questioned the sudden need to flee. By the time the fire was contained weeks later, the development deal had fallen through, the forest charred but alive, already blooming with new growth. As for me, I left the Park Service after that, hung up my ranger hat and returned to the reservation where I was born. Some might call what I did a betrayal of my duties, but I knew I'd been loyal to a higher calling, to the big wild man and all the ancient mysteries that haunt this world, just beyond the edges of our knowing. Now I spend my days tending a different kind of wilderness, teaching our ways to the next generation. But on nights when the moon is full and the wood smoke is thick, my mind wanders back to those mist-shrouded forests and the secret they hold. I hope he's still out there, roaming wild and free with his little one. I like to think that sometimes, just maybe, he thinks of me too, the human who guarded his secret and saved his home. And if you're reading this, I guess now you know it too. But let it stay here, between you, me, and these whispered pages. The wild man's legend is his own. His place is in the untamed places of this earth. There may come a day when the world is ready for the truth, but until then, let him be. Let the mystery endure, as deep and ancient as the forests themselves. I've often wondered what became of the big wild man and his little family in the years since I left the Olympic Peninsula behind. Did they migrate deeper into the wilderness, fleeing the encroaching reaches of mankind? Or do they still roam those mist-shrouded valleys and peaks, keeping their eternal watch over the forest primeval? There are nights I swear I can almost hear his lonesome howls on the wind, though I'm half a world away from those mossy emerald woods now. It's a bittersweet feeling, a tangle of wonder and worry, for even if he evaded the threat I thwarted all those years ago, I know more loom on the horizon. Humanity's hunger shows no signs of abating, for land, for resources, for dominion over anything and everything wild and untamed. In idle hours I pore over satellite images of the peninsula, marveling at how it's changed. More roads slicing through the forest, more patches of clear cut scarring the hills. But the Ho remains a stubborn bastion of green, its valleys too steep and rugged for easy exploitation. Not for the first time I wish I could be back there, boots on the ground, a watchful guardian presence against the forces of progress. But my role in this story has ended, the torch passed to younger hands, stronger backs. There's a new generation of rangers walking that time-worn beat now. Sometimes I'm tempted to reach out to them, to whisper a hint of the incredible secret knowledge I've carried all these decades. But something holds me back. Call it intuition or superstition, but I sense that now is not the time. Not yet. Perhaps the world is not ready for the truth of the big wild man, to know that we share this earth with something so much more than ourselves, that there are beings which have endured since time immemorial, which have no need of our laws or gods or economies, which simply are, in perfect balance with the living world around them. Or perhaps it's the wild man who's not ready for us, for our unceasing need to probe and prod and understand, to bend the incomprehensible to our will. Maybe his is a world better left untrammeled by our ambitions and designs, a primal place of wood and stone and flesh and fur, where instinct still reigns unchallenged. And so I've kept my silence, even as the hair on my head grays and my joints begin to ache with the approach of a season beyond earthly reckoning. The secret remains safe. It's keeping now the work of my heart rather than my hands. I hold it close, tended with the quiet devotion of a sacred flame. But there are times, in the blue velvet hush of a starlit night, when my spirit stirs with the old restless yearning, to see his shaggy silhouette hulking against the rising moon one final time, to feel the ancient wonder shiver down my spine as his eyes, old as mountains and just as unknowable, meet mine, to say without words, underscore I remember, I was there, and I will carry the memory until I too am bones and dust. But perhaps it's enough to have brushed so close against the numinous, if only for an instant, to have glimpsed the unglimpsable and been transformed down to the marrow by its haunting majesty. After all, what more can any of us hope for in the brief flicker-flash of our lives? So I content myself with the dreaming, in the drowsy sunlit hours of my twilight days, of endless emerald forests and misty granite peaks, of a place where giants still walk, beautiful and terrible, of secrets old as stone, which will long outlast the follies of men. And I smile then, to imagine the wild man and his little one roaming on into legend, forever unbowed, forever unbroken. May their song endure, long after the echo of my steps has faded from the earth. May the wild hold fast, and keep safe its ancient beating heart. As a park ranger in the remote wilderness of the Pacific Northwest, I was used to solitude. But lately something felt different. Hikers spoke in hushed tones of strange footprints, of eerie cries echoing through the night. And then there were the missing persons cases, too many to ignore. Sequoia. That was the name I had chosen for myself when I took this job 3 years ago, inspired by the towering redwoods I had loved since I was a child. I wanted a fresh start, an escape from my troubled past in the city. Financial problems, a crumbling marriage. Out here I could lose myself in nature's untamed beauty, feel small and insignificant beneath the ancient trees. The ranger station came into view ahead, a weathered cabin nestled against a backdrop of misty peaks. As I approached, my radio crackled to life. "Sequoia, you there? We've got another hiker gone missing near Crescent Lake. A solo backpacker hasn't checked in for 2 days. My heart sank as I keyed the mic. How many did this make now? 8 in the past 2 months. Copy that. I'll grab my gear and head out at first light to search the area. Silence settled back over the forest as I pushed open the heavy wooden door. But then I froze. There on the floor, a trail of muddy footprints, impossibly large. My eyes traced them to the dark doorway of my bedroom. Slowly, I drew my flashlight, my other hand resting on the grip of my sidearm. The prints led straight to the open door, a gaping void filled with shadows. Blood pounded in my ears, my every instinct screaming at me to run. But I had to know. I entered the room, the narrow beam of light slicing through the darkness. A hulking figure stood with its back to me, impossibly tall and broad-shouldered. Matted hair hung down its back. Then it turned, and I saw its face. Not human, but not quite animal. Piercing yellow eyes glowed with primal hunger. Its mouth opened, revealing jagged fangs. A scream caught in my throat. In a blur of movement it charged, a roar shaking the cabin walls. I fired on pure instinct. 1 shot, 2, diving out of the way as its momentum carried it past me to crash through the front window in an explosion of splintering wood and glass. Silence. With a trembling hand, I keyed my radio. "Station, this is Sequoia." My voice sounded strangled, unrecognizable. "Something attacked me at the cabin. It's not human." Only static answered me. The storm must have knocked out the repeater. I was on my own. With fumbling hands, I reloaded. 5 rounds left in my sidearm. Whatever that thing was, mere bullets had barely phased it. I had to warn the other rangers, organize a search for the missing hiker, but a creeping dread filled my mind. That creature knew where I lived. It had come for me. But why? Stepping over the shards of glass and twisted wood, I peered out into the night. The footprints led off into the trees, already filling with rain. What other choice did I have but to follow them, to try to get answers? Steeling myself, I plunged into the storm-lashed forest. Shadows closed in around me. The rain fell in icy sheets, the droplets stabbing against my face. I pressed on into the rugged backcountry, following the monstrous tracks as they wove between towering firs and fallen logs. The terrain grew steeper, the underbrush thicker. Soon I was clambering over boulders, slick with moss and knotted roots that seemed to writhe with a life of their own, under the erratic beam of my flashlight. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of what I had seen. Growing up, my grandmother had told stories passed down from her Lummi ancestors, speaking of Temekwes, the wild men of the woods. Huge, hairy beings who walked like men but lived like beasts. We had always thought them just legends. Could those tales have been rooted in truth? Could this creature be one of them? The ground fell away into a ravine up ahead, a narrow stream cutting through its base. I half climbed, half slid down the slippery bank, fir needles and loose rocks giving way under my boots. There was nowhere to go but forward, following the water downstream as it tumbled over boulders and fallen trees. The walls of the gully rose up around me, blocking out what little light pierced the storm clouds above. A twig snapped somewhere behind me, then another. I spun around, my light falling across a stand of vine maples. The beam caught a flash of yellow. Unblinking eyes stared out from between the leaves. It stepped forward, rising to its full height, rain sluicing down its matted fur. A growl rumbled in its chest. I took a step back, my heel catching on a root. My flashlight tumbled from my grip as I went sprawling onto the wet rocks. The beam rolled crazily, glinting off fangs and claws and feral eyes. A scream escaped my lips as it lunged, its bulk blotting out the sky. A searing pain ripped through my shoulder as I raised my arm in a feeble attempt to shield myself. Claws like steel hooks shredded through cloth and flesh and bone. The creature's fetid breath scorched my face as it pinned me to the stream bed under its crushing weight. I scrabbled at my holster, my fingers desperately seeking the grip of my weapon. The revolver came free. I jammed the muzzle against the beast's heaving flank and squeezed the trigger. Once, twice. The shots echoed like thunder cracks through the ravine. Hot blood splattered my face. With a deafening roar, the creature flung itself backward, my body still clutched in its vice-like grip. We smashed through a lattice of roots and tumbled into bracken. The world spun crazily. Soggy earth filled my nose and mouth. I fought against the blackness crowding at the edges of my vision. Somehow I managed to tear free, leaving a chunk of my jacket in the creature's grasp. Crashing through the underbrush, I ran as I had never run before, blind with pain and terror. Branches whipped against my face, my lungs seared. The ravine had to end somewhere. It had to. But a glance over my shoulder found the beast in relentless pursuit, its eyes two burning coals boring into my back. I tried to push myself faster. Then the ground disappeared beneath my feet. I pitched forward into empty air, my scream swallowed by the raging current as I plunged into the icy depths of the stream. The cold was a shock, the water a roaring darkness enveloping my broken body. Tumbling end over end, I clawed desperately for the surface. My head broke through into the churning froth. I gasped for breath, choking on icy spray. The current dragged me along, slamming me into boulders, pulling me under into the bone-numbing depths. After an eternity, the flood spat me out into a calmer pool. Shaking, retching, I dragged myself up onto the rocky bank. Everything hurt. My shoulder was a red ruin. The flashlight was gone. The revolver, too. Defenseless, I scanned the shoreline, the trees, expecting a hulking form to come bursting through at any moment. But there was nothing. Only the sound of my own ragged breathing and the rain drumming on the turbulent water. Had I lost the creature, or was it toying with me? I staggered to my feet, biting back a scream as white-hot pain lanced through my mauled arm. I had to find help, had to warn the others. But which way? The water had swept me far downstream. Nothing looked familiar in the gray pre-dawn light. I started walking, keeping to the shelter of the trees. The ranger station couldn't be that far. I tried to believe that. Then I saw it. Caught in the forked branches of a downed hemlock, a scrap of bright fabric fluttered in the wind. I knew that color, blaze orange, the same jacket the missing hiker had been wearing. Bile surged up my throat. Just beyond the log, the ground was torn up, the undergrowth splattered with dark stains. No, I didn't want to look, didn't want to see. But I crept forward and sunk to my knees. A boot still laced tight around a gnawed-off ankle, shreds of gore-soaked clothing, a rucksack, its contents strewn across the blood-soaked earth. And there, snagged on a branch, a tuft of long brown fur. I don't know how long I knelt there in the spreading crimson puddle, my mind whirling, the acrid taste of vomit on my tongue. This was no legend, no tall tale designed to scare gullible campers. This creature was real, and it was hungry. Something had drawn these beings out of the deep woods, out of myth. I had to find out what. Staying low, I searched the surrounding area, finding more torn clothing, more spots of bright arterial blood. And then, caught under a fern, the shattered screen of the hiker's cell phone still glowed with the last image captured. A towering silhouette, limned in shadows, eyes flashing yellow in the flash. I pocketed the phone, my hand shaking. As I went to stand, the bushes across from me parted and the creature stepped through. Our eyes locked, human and beast. I had no weapon, no hope to outrun it. So I spoke. Why are you doing this? A rumble sounded deep in its chest, almost like speech. It took a step closer, and I saw that beneath the matted fur, one of its muscled arms was mottled with oozing green sores. The acrid scent of infection filled the air. Understanding dawned with cold dread. The beast was sick, perhaps with something that had driven it mad with hunger for human flesh. And if there were others like it. It lunged, and I turned to flee. But there was another creature emerging from the trees behind me, and another, hulking forms with pointed ears and razor claws. A strangled sob escaped my throat. They had hunted me here, herded me like prey. The first beast roared, spittle flying from its jaws, and charged. Pain exploded through me as it struck like a freight train, talons ripping and tearing. I felt my ribs crack, felt a hot rush of blood. The world turned crimson and gray. The other beasts fell upon me in a frenzy of snarls and matted fur and snapping fangs. My vision dimmed, and I saw the endless green of the forest, of my beloved woods and streams and secret places. Somewhere above I heard the mournful cry of a hawk riding the frigid wind. My eyes fluttered shut for the last time. The trees kept their secrets. The ancient forest endured, but it would always be hungry. The old pickup truck bounced and jostled over the rutted dirt road, leading deep into the heart of Glacier National Park. Sitala Yazzie gripped the steering wheel and squinted against the glare of the setting sun through the windshield. He had driven this route countless times over the past 3 years, working as a backcountry ranger, but tonight felt different. An unsettling feeling pricked at the back of his neck, as if the forest itself was holding its breath in anticipation. Sitala first took this job to escape the chaos and noise of modern life and immerse himself in the wild solitude of nature. As a proud descendant of the Navajo, he felt a deep spiritual connection to these ancient forests and mountains. The Park Service salary was meager, but he managed to get by living simply in the old log cabin they provided him. Located miles from the nearest road or town, it had no electricity or running water. But it suited Sitala just fine. He had always been a loner, more at home in the arms of Mother Earth than surrounded by throngs of people. The red sun dipped below the sawtooth ridgeline, and shadows pooled between the pines. Rounding a bend, Sitala slowed the truck as his headlights illuminated a figure standing in the middle of the road ahead. It appeared to be a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a wide-brimmed hat. Strange, thought Sitala. He wasn't expecting to see anyone out here, and the man's clothes looked old-fashioned, like he had stepped out of the previous century. Sitala rolled to a stop a few yards away and reached for the radio handset to call it in. But when he glanced back up, the road was empty. The man had vanished. A chill ran through him despite the day's lingering heat. He shook his head and eased off the brakes. It had been a long day. his eyes must be playing tricks on him. Still, he couldn't quite shake the feeling that something was amiss as he continued on into the darkening forest. When Satala finally arrived at the cabin, dusk had faded to full night. Pistol on his hip, he stepped out into the brisk mountain air, senses alert. But the only sounds were the ordinary ones of the wilderness he had grown accustomed to: the hoot of an owl, the skitter of a squirrel in the underbrush, the sigh of wind through the pines. Chiding himself for his paranoia, Satala hauled his gear out of the truck bed. As he fumbled with the key in the failing light, he happened to glance over at the dark tree line. And that's when he saw them, two glowing red eyes peering out at him from the shadows. Satala froze, breath catching in his throat. The eyes were too large and too high off the ground to belong to any animal he knew of, and the way they bored into him was disturbingly aware. Then the eyes blinked once, slowly, and vanished. Satala stumbled backwards, nearly dropping his pack. His heart hammered in his ears. What in the world was that? With shaking hands, he quickly unlocked the door and ducked inside, slamming it shut behind him. He leaned against it, trying to collect himself. He was being irrational, he told himself firmly. There were no monsters lurking in the woods, just his own fatigue and imagination getting the better of him. Perhaps he'd glimpsed a bear or an elk, catching the glow of his headlights. Yes, that must be it. Still, Satala double-checked that the door was securely bolted before lighting a lantern and starting a fire in the huge river rock hearth. The flickering light and familiar routine of settling in for the night helped calm his nerves. Before long, he was sipping a mug of strong coffee and paging through an old favorite book. The strange events of the evening all but forgotten. He had no way of knowing that his nightmare was only just beginning. Crack! Satala jolted awake, flinging aside his quilt. He fumbled for the pistol he kept under his pillow as his sleep-fogged brain tried to process what had yanked him out of the depths of slumber. There it was again, a splintering crash from outside the cabin. His blood turned to ice when he realized the sound was coming from the direction of the truck. Satala crept to the window and peered out through a gap in the curtains, dreading what he might see. At first he could discern nothing amiss in the moon-silvered clearing, but then a massive, shadowy form detached itself from the tree line and lumbered into view. Satala's mouth went dry. The creature was humanoid in shape, but it was far too large to be a man. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, with shaggy fur covering its hulking body. Its arms hung down past its knees and ended in wickedly curved claws. But most disturbing of all was its face, a grotesque parody of human features dominated by a pair of blazing red eyes. As Satala watched in horrified disbelief, the creature reached the pickup truck in a few effortless strides. With a casual swipe of one clawed hand, it ripped the passenger side door clean off its hinges and flung it into the underbrush. Then it stooped, rummaged around in the cab for a moment, and straightened back up. Clutched in its fist and glinting in the moonlight was Satala's only sat phone. The ranger's heart sank. He kept the phone for emergencies, given the cabin's remote location. His radio was on the same frequency as the park ranger's, but the phone was his lifeline to the outside world. And now this monster had it. Satala's grip tightened on the pistol butt. What did this thing want? As if in answer, the creature suddenly swiveled its huge, shaggy head in his direction. Satala ducked back from the window, pulse pounding. Had it seen him? He held his breath, straining his ears. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, a bone-chilling roar split the night, so loud it shook the cabin walls. Satala didn't need to look to know the creature was charging. He threw himself across the room just as a huge fist smashed through the window in an explosion of glass. Grasping claws raked the air inches from his head as he rolled and came up in a crouch, pistol aimed at the gaping hole. The monster's malevolent red eyes glared at him through the shattered frame. Satala fired, the shots deafeningly loud in the close confines of the cabin. The creature jerked and roared in pain but didn't go down. Satala kept firing until the hammer clicked on an empty chamber. In the sudden ringing silence, the creature regarded him balefully for a moment. Then, unbelievably, it spoke. "You cannot stop me, little man," it rumbled in a deep, guttural voice. "I have returned to reclaim what is mine. "Stay out of my way, or I will crush you like an insect." And with that, it turned and loped off into the forest. Sitala slowly lowered the pistol, his hands shaking. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't exist outside of campfire stories and urban legends. Yet here he was, standing in his wrecked cabin, the lingering stench of the creature heavy in the air. He had to get help, had to warn someone. But who would believe him? He barely believed it himself. With no sat phone and only the short-range park radio, Sitala was completely cut off. He couldn't go for help on foot either. It was over 50 miles of dense wilderness to the nearest ranger station or town. He was trapped out here with a monster ripped straight from a nightmare. As the adrenaline drained away, Sitala sank to the floor, his head in his hands. How was he going to get out of this alive? A faint light on the eastern horizon heralded the approach of dawn as Sitala bagged or carefully burned the remaining shattered glass debris from the attack. His Navajo ancestors had passed down many tales of magic and monsters, but never in his wildest imaginings did he think he would encounter something like this creature. It had spoken to him, threatened him. This was clearly no ordinary animal. If Bigfoot or Sasquatch really existed, Sitala now had no doubt this is what he was dealing with. But what did it want? It had said something about reclaiming what was his. What could that mean? Exhausted but too keyed up to sleep, he instead focused on inspecting and restoring what he could of the cabin's damage. The door frame would need complete replacement, but he was able to jury-rig the window frame with boards from the roofed-in side porch and extra nails. His meager hand tools would simply have to make do until what? He still had no way to reach the outside world for help or to warn others of the danger. An idea began forming in his mind. The log cabin serving as his seasonal ranger residence dated all the way back to the early 1920s, when it was likely built as someone's hunting camp. And he now remembered a story once told to him by Joe Three Bears, a Cree elder, that Cree hunters and trappers had long made use of semaphore stations in remote areas to relay messages over long distances across the wilderness in the days before two-way radios became commonly available. Semaphore involved a person positioned on a high spot, like a ridge or fire tower, using two flags or paddles held in specific positions to represent letters and numbers. Another person with a telescope some miles away on the next high spot would read the message, then relay it onward to the next station. Did any of those old semaphore stations still exist in the glacier high country? Much of the park was still wild and relatively undisturbed. It was worth a try anyhow. What other choice did he have? Sitala briskly fixed himself a quick breakfast, pondering his route. He was scheduled to be on a routine backcountry check. This meant miles of hiking to remote lakes and trail shelters spread throughout his patrol region, a several-day circuit on which he would almost certainly encounter a semaphore spot, if any remained. The wildfire watch ridges and towers were all manned this time of year, and surely one or more of his fellow rangers would eventually miss Sitala's lack of regular radio check-ins and come looking for him. It was a start. Studying his regional topo maps, he located several likely semaphore stations within a day's vigorous hiking, most of them on the bare, stony ridges erupting thousands of feet above the surrounding lodgepole forests and jewel-like lakes. Doable, if the creature didn't find him first. Checking his day pack of emergency gear and shouldering his trail pack with a week's lightweight bushwalking kit, Sitala set out at a brisk pace, the early sun warm on his back. Despite his weariness, the normality of the hiking routine through magnificent mountain scenery helped settle his nerves. Squirrels and whiskey jacks scolded from trailside branches, and soon he spotted a browsing mule deer doe with two young spotted fawns. Further on, he watched a cinnamon black bear grubbing for tubers in a wet meadow. It woofed at him in annoyance, then ambled away. All seemed right with the world again, except for that spine-prickling sense of being watched. As the day wore on, he tackled the steep and rocky trail up to Aurora Ridge Lookout. This was the first of the potential semaphore spots he intended to check, and the one giving the fastest high country access to the greatest number of fire watch towers. If he could reach the lookout by late afternoon, any staff there could put out a radioed alert. Help would soon be on the way. But upon reaching the summit, Sitala, as dismayed to encounter only an automated weather station and a few pieces of sturdy metal pipe sticking up out of the ridge stones. the rusted remains of what must have been the old semaphore platform structure. No one here any longer read the skies for distant smoke or flashed signals to unseen companions afar. He was still utterly on his own. Chewing on a strip of salt-dried venison as he studying his map, Sitala pondered his next move in the deepening afternoon light. It appeared the next possible place from which to send a distress message lay near the shores of Kia Lake, about 8 miles further west. An easy trek back in his strong youth, but it would be full dark before he could arrive there now, and did he really want a night hike across Sasquatch territory? He had best make cold camp right here and tackle his way down to the lake at first light. He is just cinching his lean-to of spruce branches when the undeniable sound of heavy footsteps came crunching across the exposed stones. Fear prickled the hairs on his neck. Slowly he turned and beheld the creature looming not 20 paces away, eyes glowing red with menace in the gathering dusk. It had found him again. The creature stood unmoving, its fathomless red eyes fixed on Sitala. The dying sun backlit its monstrous form with a ruddy glow, like something straight out of hell. Slowly, purposefully, it raised one clawed hand and pointed a singular long yellowed nail directly at the ranger's chest. "I know what you are attempting, little man," it rumbled. "Cease your pathetic efforts. There will be no rescue coming for you." Sitala's blood ran cold. How could it possibly have known about his plan to summon help? He had told no one, had seen no sign of the creature following him, and yet it had found him again, effortlessly. "What do you want from me?" Sitala demanded, voice trembling only slightly. "Why are you doing this?" The creature threw back its head and uttered a terrible laugh, like the grating of stones. "You truly do not know, do you? Little man, you have trespassed in my domain. You and your kind are not welcome here." Sitala frowned in confusion. "Your domain? This is a national park. It belongs to all people. I'm a ranger here. It's my job to—" "Silence!" the creature roared, causing Sitala to stumble back a step. "I was here long before your trifling parks and borders. I have watched over these ancient forests since before your people looked upon them with greedy eyes." The creature took a step forward, its bulk looming over the ranger. "You have built your roads and your lodges, brought your clamor and your crowds into the deep places that once knew only stillness. You think the untamed wild is yours to shackle and subdue. But you are wrong, little man. There are those of us who will never yield to your yoke." With a speed that belied its size, the creature lunged forward and seized Sitala's pack in its claws, effortlessly hoisting the ranger off his feet until they were eye to hellish eye. Sitala kicked and struggled, but he was helpless in the creature's iron grip. "I should kill you now for your impudence," it hissed. "Scatter your bones for the carrion crows, but I am not without mercy. Leave this place. Go back to your concrete and steel cages and trouble me no more. That is your only warning." With that, the creature flung Sitala away like a rag doll. He crashed into the spruce boughs of his makeshift shelter and lay stunned for a moment, gasping for breath. When he managed to lift his head, the creature was gone, melted into the shadows as if it had never been. Only the ruin of the lean-to marked its passage. Sitala hauled himself painfully to his feet, his mind reeling. There could be no doubt now. This was no mere animal he faced, but an ancient spirit of the wild, an embodied rage against the encroaching modern world. It couldn't be bargained or reasoned with. Sitala's only hope was to escape its domain before it tired of its forbearance. But he couldn't just abandon his post, leave innocent park visitors to the mercy of the creature's wrath. If he could only get word out somehow, even at the cost of his own life. Sitala's gaze fell upon his topo map, fluttering in the rising night wind. There was one last option, one final, slim chance. It would mean descending into greater peril than he could possibly imagine. But what choice did he have? Stuffing the map back into his pack with shaking hands, Sitala doused his little fire and set out once more, turning his back on the looming bulk of Aurora Ridge. He needed to hike like he had never hiked before, for a far more daunting goal now lay ahead of him. Somewhere in the forested valley below, in one of the park's most remote and untrammeled corners, lay the dark waters of a lake whose name was spoken only in whispers among the Cree, a place of ancient secrets and forbidden power. Heart-pounding, Sitala struck out for Lost Knife Lake, and the mysteries that lurked beneath its placid surface. He could only pray he would reach it before the creature caught his scent once more. The fate of perhaps far more than this single park now lay in his hands. Sitala crashed through the undergrowth, thorny vines tearing at his clothes as he panted and scrambled down the steep, rock-strewn slope. He had abandoned the trail miles ago, instinctively aware the creature would expect him to use conventional routes. His only hope was to make himself as difficult to track as possible, even if it meant tackling the roughest terrain. He paused for a moment, hands on knees as he gulped air into his burning lungs. The forest pressed close around him, dense and primordial. No hint of sky could be seen through the interlocking canopy far above. In the gloom, time seemed to fall away. Sitala could almost imagine himself transported back centuries, to an era when the land knew only the footsteps of his ancestors and the spirits they revered and feared. Movement in the corner of his eye snapped him back to the present. He whirled, reaching for the knife at his belt, but it was only a raven launching itself from a gnarled pine bough, its strident cry echoing off the ridgeline. Sitala watched it soar out of sight, unease prickling his skin. In Navajo lore, the raven was often seen as an ominous sign, a messenger from the realm of the dead. An icy rivulet of sweat trickled down his spine despite the deep forest chill. Was it his imagination, or were the shadows between the ancient trunks deeper than they should be? More watchful? Shaking off the unsettling sensation, Sitala dug out his topo map and compass. By his reckoning, Lost Knife Lake lay about 4 miles to the northwest, through some of the park's most challenging and unforgiving backcountry. Game trails crisscrossed the area, allowing swifter travel than trailblazing, but he would have to stay alert. This was prime grizzly and cougar country, threats he was well versed in dealing with. It was the more shadowy menaces that concerned him now. As he folded the map away, his hand brushed the small leather pouch hanging from a cord around his neck. His fingers closed around it reflexively, taking comfort in its familiar weight. The medicine bundle had been handed down through generations of his family, created long ago by one of Sitala's ancient forebears, or so the story said. He had never paid much heed to such tales, but now he found himself hoping there was truth in the old magics. He would need every scrap of protection he could get. Squaring his shoulders, Sitala pushed on, letting instinct guide his feet as he vanished into the gloom. High above, the raven circled once, twice, then winged its way north toward Lost Knife Lake, and the shadows, ever so slightly, shifted in its wake. The sun slanted low through the pines by the time Sitala crested the last ridge above Lost Knife. The aptly named lake stretched out below him, a black mirror reflecting the angry red blaze of sunset. Sheer cliffs marched away to either side, making the lakeshore accessible only by a narrow, treacherous game trail snaking down the slope. An eerie silence hung over the little basin, broken only by the forlorn cry of a loon somewhere out on the water. It was like stepping into another world, one untouched by the passage of centuries. According to the stories, Lost Knife was a nexus, a place where the membrane between worlds wore thin. The Cree believed one could sometimes glimpse the shadows of the spirit realm shimmering beneath its surface, and hear the ghostly voices of ancestors on the wind. Medicine men and women would brave its shores when they needed to commune with the other side, or battle against creatures of darkness. For as much as the lake promised wisdom and power, it was also a haunt of malevolent forces. Only the most skilled and pure of heart stood a chance of emerging unscathed. Sitala had never put much stock in the more fantastical elements of his people's myths, tall tales to frighten children and entertain around the campfire, nothing more. But the events of the last few days had badly shaken his certainty in the rational world. If Bigfoot could stalk the forests in the flesh, who was to say what other ancient beings might lurk in the shadows? The trepidation he'd felt since leaving the ravaged cabin crystallized into dread. Coming here alone, practically unarmed, was madness. What if the lake's bad medicine poisoned his mind, left him easy prey for the creature? He was turning to climb back up the ridge when a flicker of movement out on the water caught his eye. A great dark shape was breaching the surface, sending ripples racing outwards. Sitala stared, at once entranced and repelled. The shape appeared roughly human, but far larger, with a strange ridged brow. As it rose from the depths, water cascading from its muscular bulk, Sitala saw that its lower half was scaled, tapering like that of a salmon. Cold sweat beaded his brow as realization crashed over him. He knew this creature from his grandfather's tales, the lake spirit, ancient guardian of these waters, and bearer of omens from the spirit world. In all the stories, it appeared only in times of greatest peril or calamity. Why here? Why now? Before Sitala could wrestle with the implications, the lake spirit thrust a dripping arm toward the shore, directly at the astonished ranger. In a voice like the grinding of boulders, it spoke a single word: beware. Then, as swiftly and silently as it had appeared, the spirit sank back into the black depths. Sitala stood rooted to the spot, ears ringing in the sudden silence. Beware? Beware of what? The monster already stalking him? He'd left the other dangers of the backcountry far behind. What could be worse than a vengeful Sasquatch? Turning slowly, Sitala scanned the tree line with new eyes, dread knotting his guts. The answer lay out there, somewhere in the gathering dark. It was becoming chillingly clear that the Bigfoot might not be the only malign presence in this wilderness, and Sitala was beginning to doubt he would ever make it out to warn the world. Night descended swiftly in the Lost Knife Basin. Sitala huddled in the insufficient glow of his tiny fire, fighting down panic as the impenetrable black pressed close around his campsite. The occasional snap of a twig or rustle of undergrowth nearby caused him to jump and peer wildly about. But he could see nothing beyond the feeble circle of firelight. Imagination ran riot, conjuring hordes of red-eyed monsters crouched just beyond his sight. Sitala clutched his medicine bundle, murmuring half-remembered prayers and protection chants as he fought to master his fear. He couldn't afford to give in to it now. If he had any hope of surviving the night and warning others of what lurked in the park, he needed to keep his wits sharp. The evening's otherworldly encounter played over and over in his mind. Why had the lake spirit appeared? What was the danger it foretold? Fragments of his grandfather's old tales swirled through Sitala's thoughts. There had been stories of spirits who could take on the form of creatures or people, using the disguise to lure the unwary to their doom. Skinwalkers, the Navajo had called them, soul eaters, aberrations that broke the boundaries between realms. Could the Bigfoot be such a being? Sitala wondered sickly. When it appeared to him before, it had behaved almost as if it wanted Sitala to find this place. Had it been herding him here all along, manipulating him into seeking out the lake? And for what purpose? To slay him on this dark shore, or did it have even more nefarious plans? The possibilities didn't bear contemplating. A brisk wind kicked up, setting the pines to groaning. Sparks swirled up from the fire and winked out in the night sky that was no longer quite so dark. Sitala frowned up at it, unease prickling his scalp. A faint, sickly green glow was spreading across the firmament, pulsing like a ghostly auroral curtain. He had never seen anything like it. And as he watched, the glow began to writhe and take on form, as if something was pushing its way through from the other side, something immense and hungry. Heart hammering, Sitala surged to his feet, not daring to take his eyes from the sky. Was this what the lake spirit had warned of? What eldritch abomination was trying to tear its way through the veil? And what hope did one mortal man have against it? He scrabbled to pour more wood on the fire, for all the good it would do. The medicine bundle hummed against his skin, making his teeth ache. Whatever was coming, it was too late to run. A bone-chilling roar split the night. Sitala whirled toward the sound, dreading what he would see. The Bigfoot erupted from the underbrush at the forest's edge, eyes blazing in the firelight. It looked different somehow, warped and twisted. Its form shot through with the same ghastly green phosphorescence as the sky. Sitala's stomach turned over as he saw that in place of hands and feet, the creature now sported vicious, serrated claws. "Did you think you could hide from me here, little man?" The thing that had been the Bigfoot spoke, its voice an obscene gurgle. "The threshold of worlds where my power waxes greatest. You have delivered yourself to my feasting grounds." The creature threw its arms wide, its body stretching and distorting like a mad shadow puppet. Mouths split open across its chest and torso, rings of jagged teeth gnashing and gibbering. "Witness my true form and despair. I am Ithaquah, walker between worlds, harvester of souls. Long have I craved the taste of the living. It has been eons since any mortal was foolish enough to venture here. Sitala tried to form words, a denial, a prayer, anything, but only a strangled croak emerged. This could not be real. He had to be lost in some fever dream, a hallucination. Any moment he would wake to find himself back in his battered cabin, or better yet, his own bed back on the res. There was no creature, no monster wearing Bigfoot's skin, only madness. But the pain when Ithaqwa's claws shredded across his chest was terribly, viscerally real. Sitala fell back with a scream, hot blood coursing down his front. The medicine bundle at his neck flared with searing heat, as if it contained a tiny sun. Through a haze of pain and terror he saw the creature flinch back, hissing. "You bear a ward? Some paltry medicine bag?" Ithaqwa spat. "No matter, it only prolongs your agony." It lunged again, aiming for Sitala's throat. Never had Sitala moved so fast. He didn't think, didn't plan. His battered body reacted on pure instinct, hurling him sideways and through the curtain of flames. He hit the ground on the other side, rolling to extinguish his smoldering clothes. A hideous shriek told him Ithaqwa had not been quick enough to avoid the fire. Somehow, Sitala staggered upright, nearly falling again as the world dipped and swayed around him. The medicine bundle was a searing brand against his skin. He clutched it desperately, praying to any ancestor who might hear him for guidance, for deliverance. Ithaqwa thrashed and writhed, beating at the flames, eating into its twisting hide. The eerie green light was intensifying, painting the scene in a nightmarish glow. Shapes moved in its depths, terrible forms straining at the edges of reality. The walker between worlds threw back its head and loosed a guttural, wailing chant that made Sitala's ears bleed. The veil was thinning further. Ithaqwa was calling its brethren, and they were answering. In that moment, staring down the maw of utter ruin, a strange calm settled over Sitala. The old tales were true, the monsters were real, and if he fell here there would be no one to stand against the darkness when it came ravening into the world of men. Perhaps this was what he had been born for, to be the last watchman on the walls of night. Drawing in a deep, steadying breath, Sitala faced Ithaqwa over the leaping flames. He could feel the medicine bundle guiding him now, pulsing in time with the beat of his heart. His cracked lips shaped words in a language he didn't know yet understood in his marrow. A war cry, a spell to cast down abominations. It was time to remind these horrors why they should fear the light. The old logger's tale sent a chill down Sequoia's spine. The grizzled man leaned forward, his eyes glinting in the firelight. "Mark my words, son, that weren't no bear what left them tracks up on Desolation Ridge, to where the Sasquatch, the Bigfoot, and you best steer clear if you know what's good for you." Sequoia forced a chuckle, not wanting to let on how much the story unnerved him. "I appreciate the warning, but I think I'll be all right. Ain't nothing in these woods I can't handle." The old-timer shook his head. "Pride comes afore the fall, boy. You'll learn." With that ominous declaration hanging in the night air, Sequoia bid the logger good night and returned to his cabin. Despite his brave words, an uneasiness gripped him as he settled in for a fitful sleep, the shadows seeming to loom and shift outside his windows. Being a park ranger in the remote wilderness of the Olympic National Forest was everything Sequoia Rainwater had hoped for when he took the job. The grandson of a Quileute elder, he'd grown up on the reservation, learning the old stories and ways, developing a deep reverence for the untamed landscape of his ancestors. After 2 tours in Afghanistan, he'd come home restless and unsettled. The chaos of the modern world grated on his nerves, so when the opportunity arose to become a ranger in one of the most isolated posts in the lower 48, he jumped at the chance. His family had been aghast. No people out there, his father argued. Nothing but trees and cougars and bears. Better you should stay here, find a nice girl, build a life. But the call of the wild was too strong. With his veteran's benefits and the ranger's modest salary, Sequoia could get by. All he needed was a roof over his head and the murmuring of the ancient forests to soothe his soul. At least that's what he'd thought. But after that unsettling encounter with the old logger, and the strange sense of foreboding that followed him back to his cabin, Sequoia found himself wondering if he'd gotten in over his head for the first time. As he drifted into an uneasy slumber, the sighing of the wind through the towering Douglas firs sounded almost like whispering or warning. A week passed with no further sign or word of the alleged Sasquatch. Sequoia went about his ranger duties, clearing trails, packing out litter, keeping a watchful eye out for poachers and resource thieves. The old-timer's tale began to fade to the back of his mind, dismissed as backwoods superstition. Then the first hiker went missing. Jenna Alvarez, 24, an experienced backpacker from Seattle. When she failed to check in with her family for 4 days, they raised the alarm. Sequoia was part of the search and rescue team that combed the dense underbrush and rugged terrain around where she'd last been seen. 5 grueling days turned up no trace of the missing woman. It was as if she'd vanished into thin air. Baffled and dispirited, the search teams finally gave up, forced to concede defeat in the face of the forest's inscrutable mysteries. Sequoia took it hard. Though he'd never met Jenna, he felt the weight of responsibility that came with the uniform. He should have been able to protect her, to bring her home safe. It ate at him. 2 weeks later, it happened again. Trevor Bowen, a retired firefighter, went for a day hike and never returned. Once more, Sequoia threw himself into the hunt, scouring every gully and thicket for some sign of the man. Once more, the firs and spruce held their secrets close. Heartsick and frustrated, Sequoia turned to his grandfather's stories for solace and insight. He pored over the faded photographs of his great-great-uncle, a member of the Quileute Warrior Society back in the early 1900s. One picture in particular captured his attention. A group of solemn-faced men posed with an enormous, fur-covered man-like figure suspended from poles. The thing was easily 8 feet tall, its huge barrel chest and pendulous arms crisscrossed with leather straps. The face was a crude wooden mask, a caricature of a snarling beast. But it was the feet that sent a spike of dread down Sequoia's spine. Huge splayed toes, far too long to be human, exactly like the plaster casts of the mystery tracks he'd seen in the ranger's office. "Great uncle," Sequoia implored the sepia ghost. "What does it mean? What is that thing?" But the stern eyes of his ancestor yielded no answers, only more questions, and outside the whispering woods waited. On the night of the new moon, Sequoia woke to screaming, a high, ululating shriek that went on, freezing the blood in his veins. He was out of bed in an instant, reaching for his boots and gun with shaking hands. The screams were coming from somewhere up near Desolation Ridge, where the missing hikers had last been seen, where the old logger swore he'd seen the Bigfoot tracks. There was no time to radio for backup. Someone was out there and they needed help now. Unwilling to waste a single second more, Sequoia plunged out into the cloying darkness of the moonless night. The forest closed in around him as he ran, the beam of his flashlight swallowed up by the hungry black. The screams grew louder, more desperate, spurring him on even as a small, primitive part of his brain gibbered at him to turn back, to flee. He crested a rise, lungs burning, legs trembling with exertion and adrenaline. There, in a small clearing, he finally saw the source of those awful, agony-racked cries. A woman, naked and filthy, her hair a matted tangle, thrashed in the center of a ring of stones. Scattered around her were animal bones and strange fetishes woven from fur and feathers. She shrieked words in a language Sequoia had never heard before, her body contorting into impossible shapes. "Ma'am," he called out. "Ma'am, I'm a park ranger. I'm here to help." She whipped around at the sound of his voice, and Sequoia stumbled back in horror. Her eyes were gone, empty bloody sockets staring out of a ruin of a face. Her mouth gaped in a rictus of ecstasy and torment, far too wide to be natural. "Oh God," Sequoia whispered, "what happened to you?" The woman spoke, her voice a guttural rasp. "He is coming, the greater one. We are chosen. We are blessed. He is coming." From the depths of the forest, an answering roar shook the night, a sound to stop the heart. Suddenly Sequoia understood with a deadly chill certainty. The lost hikers, the screams, the dread that hung over these woods like a shroud. It was all connected, and he had just walked into a nightmare far more terrible than he ever could have imagined. Sequoia backed away from the awful figure slowly, trying to keep his flashlight trained on those empty, accusing sockets. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the tide of horror welling up inside. A cult. There was some kind of twisted cult out here in the deep woods, enacting God only knew what profane rites. That creature from his ancestors' photos. Could that be the greater one the woman spoke of? Had the lost hikers been taken as some sort of blood sacrifice? Another roar sounded much closer this time, raising the hairs on the back of Sequoia's neck. He had to get out of here, radio for help. Try to find some way to save that pathetic ruin of a woman. But even as he turned to flee, the shadows behind the woman detached themselves from the tree line. Tall shapes, far taller than any human could ever be, glided forward on silent feet. Feet that ended in splayed, beastly toes. The woman threw her head back and screamed with laughter, welcoming the shadows. Yes, yes, the greater one comes, we are chosen, Sequoia ran. There was nothing more he could do here, not alone against those things. He pelted back down the ridge, the unhinged laughter and thunderous footfalls of the pursuing creatures filling his ears. A root snagged his foot, sending him crashing face first into the odorous decay of the forest floor. Spitting soil, he rolled onto his back, propping himself up on his elbows just in time to see the monstrous things break through the undergrowth. Rancid fur, huge barrel chests, yellow fangs bared in vicious snarls, eyes that glinted with a feral, cunning intelligence. They loomed over him, towering, terrible avatars of the wild's darkest heart. Sequoia fumbled for his gun, but quicker than thought, a great, sinewy hand batted the weapon into the ferns. Another closed around his throat, hauling him off the ground like a rag doll. He kicked and thrashed, but it was useless. The things were terrifyingly strong. As his vision began to tunnel, the gray blur of unconsciousness washing in, Sequoia found himself thinking of his father's warning, of the great-uncle's tense, fearful face behind ancient glass, of the old logger's dire admonition. They had all known, he realized, known and tried to warn him, but he hadn't listened, and now the price of his folly would be his life. With that final despairing thought, Sequoia Rainwater slipped down into the drowning dark. He woke to agony, his hands bound tightly behind his back with rough twine that bit into his abraded wrists. When he tried to cry out, he found his mouth stuffed with a wad of foul-tasting fabric. He nearly choked on the musty fibers, gagging and wheezing through his nose. "Ah, our guest awakens," a voice purred from the shadows. A woman's voice, musical and refined, jarringly at odds with the muffled shrieks and brutal snarls Sequoia could hear somewhere beyond. A slender figure detached itself from the shifting darkness, resolving into a stately woman of late middle age. She wore some sort of ceremonial robe woven from leaves, lichen, and what looked disturbingly like tufts of blood-stained fur. Antlers branched from her wild gray hair, hung with jangling fetishes of bone and amber. Her eyes were the cold silver of a winter moon. "I imagine you have questions," she said, reaching out one long-nailed hand to stroke Sequoia's face almost tenderly. He flinched away from her touch, glaring his hatred and defiance. The woman only laughed. "So fierce, so proud, like your ancestors. They too fought until the end, but all bend the knee to the greater one in time." She seized his chin in an iron grip, forcing him to meet that merciless lunar gaze. "This has been our land since before your people's people dreamed of walking out of the bearing mists. The greater one reigned here long before your soft modern gods, and he will reign long after your civilization has crumbled back into the dust." Sequoia strained against his bonds, snarling muffled curses. The woman shook her head almost fondly. "Fight all you like, young one. It will make no difference. You have been chosen, called to a higher purpose. Soon you will take your place in the pale court of the Sasquatch King." She made a small gesture, and the huge, hulking shapes of the Sasquatch detached themselves from the shadows. Sequoia thrashed and bucked, but their terrible hands held him fast. The woman produced a needle-sharp obsidian blade, its edge glinting evilly. "This sacred athame was old when the world was young," she crooned, "forged in the fires of the Greater One's rage, cooled in the blood of 1,000 souls. With it I anoint you, Sequoia of the Quileute. I dedicate your strength, your heart, your mind to the service of the Sasquatch King. With this holy blade I sever your ties to the world of men and bind you to the Pale Court for now and forevermore." She raised the athame high. The Sasquatch's grips tightened, their fetid breath hot on Sequoia's neck. He squeezed his eyes shut and thought of his grandfather's weathered face, his father's worried frown, his mother's kind eyes. "Forgive me," he whispered through the gag. "I should have listened." Then the blade fell, and Sequoia rainwater was no more. When the first rangers came across the scene a week later, they could scarcely countenance what they saw. The ceremonial clearing was a ruin, the strange structures of woven branches smashed, the arcane patterns gouged into the earth scuffed into meaninglessness. Of Sequoia himself, only his battered ranger's badge remained, half trampled into the churned-up mud. No tracks, no sign, no clues to indicate where he might have been taken. It was as if the forest had simply opened up and swallowed him whole. The official report spoke of a probable cougar attack, a grim example of the hazards faced by rangers in the untamed reaches of the wilderness. The search was called off after a few days, the case quietly closed. But the rangers who knew Sequoia, who had grown up hearing the same whispered stories around the firelight, they clung to a darker fear. Sometimes, late at night, deep in their cups, they spoke of an ancient evil that lurked in the shadowed heart of the Olympic National Forest, an evil that had never been conquered, only temporarily quelled by the brave warriors of old. They say it is growing again, gaining strength in the hidden places, biding its time until its dread messengers can sow their cursed seed far and wide, until the Sasquatch King can rise and claim his long-denied dominion over the land and all the souls who walk upon it. They say an age of blood and shadow is coming, that those who hear the Sasquatch's call in the whispering night are doomed to serve, to hunt, to yearn for the day their dark liege strides forth from his forested kingdom to bathe the world in primal fury. For what is Seattle but one more hunting ground? What is man but one more beast to be broken to fang and claw? When the Greater One ascends his savage throne, none shall be spared. And so they wait, the grim-faced rangers who once called Sequoia friend. They watch the tree line and keep their weapons close. They ward their cabins with the old signs and mutter the ancient prayers of protection. And when the wind sighs through the pines and sets the dark to muttering, they shiver and turn their faces from the night. For they know the truth that the rest of us, lost in our neon and concrete, have long forgotten. In the wildwood, in the place where the map-makers fear to tread, the Sasquatch King and his pale court are rising, and soon, very soon, they shall be hungry. Pray that they do not set their sights on you. The crisp mountain air filled my lungs as I stepped out of the rustic cabin that had been my home for the past 5 years. Dakota was the name I was given by my Cheyenne father, meaning friend to everyone. But out here in the remote wilderness of the Pacific Northwest, friends were few and far between. I took this job as a park ranger to escape the chaos of the modern world. The solitude suited me, and I found peace among the towering cedars and meandering trails. Little did I know that peace was about to be shattered. As I set off on my morning patrol, a strange stillness hung in the air. The usual chorus of birdsong was absent, replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the crunch of my boots against the pine-needle-strewn path. I'd only walked about a mile when I came across the first sign of trouble, a campsite, ravaged and abandoned. The tent was shredded, supplies scattered across the small clearing. It looked like the scene of a violent struggle. A knot formed in my stomach as I surveyed the wreckage. What could have done this? I reached for my radio to report the incident, but hesitated. If I called it in, I'd have a swarm of rangers and police crawling all over my peaceful forest. No, I decided to investigate further on my own. It was a decision I would come to regret. I searched the campsite for clues, but found nothing conclusive. Just a few scraps of fabric, a broken lantern, and a strange, musky odor lingering in the air. It was almost like wet dog, but with an undercurrent of something else, something primal and unsettling. Determined to get to the bottom of this mystery, I widened my search, venturing off the main trail and deeper into the untamed heart of the forest. The trees grew denser, blocking out the sun and casting long shadows across the mossy ground. As I pressed on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I found myself whirling around at every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves. But there was never anything there. Hours passed, and I was about to give up and head back to the cabin, when I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. There, in a small glade, was a footprint. But not just any footprint. This one was massive, easily twice the size of my own, and it was vaguely human in shape. I felt a chill run down my spine as realization dawned. The stories I had heard whispered around campfires, tales I had always dismissed as mere legend. Could they be true? Was Bigfoot real? And if so, was it responsible for the destroyed campsite? I should have turned back then, reported my find, and let the proper authorities handle it. But some combination of stubbornness and foolish curiosity drove me forward. I had to know the truth. Against my better judgment, I began tracking the footprints. They led me deeper and deeper into the wilderness, far off any marked trail. The forest grew darker, the silence more oppressive. It felt like I was walking into the maw of some great ancient beast. The footprints ended abruptly at the mouth of a cave, a yawning void carved into the side of a steep hill. I hesitated at the entrance, peering into the inky blackness. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to flee this cursed place. But I had come too far to turn away now. With a deep breath and a muttered prayer to whatever gods might be listening, I clicked on my flashlight and stepped into the unknown. The cave was damp and musty, the air thick with the same strange odor I had smelled at the destroyed campsite. My flashlight beam seemed feeble in the oppressive darkness, barely illuminating the rough stone walls. I had only ventured a few yards when I heard it, a low, guttural growl that echoed from the depths of the cave. I froze, heart hammering in my chest. The sound came again, closer this time, accompanied by the heavy thud of footsteps. I turned to run, but my feet tangled in something on the cave floor. I crashed to the ground, flashlight flying from my hand and shattering against the stone. Plunged into total darkness, I scrambled backwards on my hands and knees, desperate to escape, but it was too late. I felt a presence looming over me, smelled its fetid breath. A large, hairy hand wrapped around my ankle, dragging me deeper into the cave. I screamed, but there was no one to hear me in this godforsaken place. The last thing I saw before blacking out was a pair of glowing red eyes, staring at me with a feral, hungry intensity. I awoke to pain, my head throbbing and my body aching. I was lying on a cold, hard surface, the damp chill of the cave seeping into my bones. In the dim light filtering in from the entrance, I could make out the shapes of bones scattered across the cave floor. With a sickening lurch, I realized some of them were human. I tried to stand, but found my hands and feet were bound with thick, rough rope. Panic surged through me as the events of the previous day came flooding back. The destroyed campsite, the footprints, the thing in the cave. A shadow fell across the cave entrance, and I looked up to see a massive, hulking figure silhouetted against the light. It ducked into the cave, moving with a lumbering, almost clumsy gait. As it drew closer, I could make out more details. Shaggy, matted fur, long, sinewy arms, a face that was almost human but distorted, feral. Bigfoot, the creature of legend, now terrifyingly real and standing mere feet from me. It regarded me with those eerily intelligent eyes, head cocked to one side as if trying to decide what to do with me. I held my breath, waiting for the end. But to my surprise, the creature made no move to harm me. Instead, it turned and lumbered back out of the cave, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts and the grim remains of its previous victims. Hours passed, stretching into an interminable nightmare-filled night. I drifted in and out of consciousness, my mind conjuring vivid horrors in the darkness. The few times I managed to fall asleep, I was jolted awake by the sounds of movement outside the cave, the heavy tread of the creature pacing back and forth. As dawn approached, a grim realization settled over me. No one knew where I was. I had ventured out alone, without logging my route or checking in with the ranger station. Even if they launched a search, they'd have no idea where to look. I was well and truly on my own. Despair threatened to overwhelm me, but I clung to a stubborn spark of determination. I refused to die here, to become just another pile of bones in this monster's lair. With painstaking effort, I managed to work my bindings loose, the rough rope chafing my skin raw. I staggered to my feet, legs cramped and unsteady. The cave entrance gaped before me, a portal to an uncertain freedom. I took a deep breath, gathered my courage, and ran. I burst out of the cave into the watery light of dawn, half expecting to feel the creature's claws sink into my back at any moment. But nothing happened. The forest was still and silent, mist curling between the trees. I ran for what felt like hours, driven by pure adrenaline and the primal need to survive. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, collapsing in a heap on the soft loam of the forest floor. It was there that the search party found me, delirious and hypothermic. They told me I was lucky to be alive, that I had been missing for 3 days. I tried to tell them about the creature, about the horrors I had seen, but they exchanged worried looks and spoke to me in soothing tones, as if to a child waking from a nightmare. But I know what I saw. I know the truth that lurks in the dark heart of the forest. And though I have returned to the safety of civilization, a part of me will always remain in those shadowed woods, forever haunted by the memory of glowing red eyes and the musty smell of wet fur. For I have seen the face of legend, and I will never be the same. The old ranger's cabin creaked and groaned as the wind howled through the towering evergreens surrounding it. I sat huddled by the wood stove, trying to thaw my chilled bones after another long day patrolling the deep Olympic wilderness. Policing tourists and local teens looking for trouble was part of the job I signed up for when I took the position as a park ranger 5 years ago. But lately there was something else out there in the old-growth forests, something that unnerved me in a way I'd never experienced in all my time living alone out here. A branch snapped outside, making me sit bolt upright. Probably just an elk, I tried to reassure myself as I rose to peer out the frosty cabin window into the moonlit night. But I couldn't shake the eerie feeling I was being watched from the shadows. I had taken this post for the peace and solitude, a respite from my troubled past, and the breathtaking beauty, of course, winding fjords, pristine lakes, meadows erupting in wildflowers come summer. I felt more of a kinship with this untamed landscape and its creatures than I ever had with most people. But now something had shifted in these woods I called home. The old-timers in the closest logging town spoke in hushed whispers of strange prints found by campers, of piercing screams echoing from ridgetops on moonless nights. They'd give me pointed looks and warn me to be careful out there, alone and unarmed as I often was. I brushed off their concerns at first, chalking it up to overactive imaginations and too much home-brewed moonshine. But a few months back, I stumbled across a print myself, buried deep in the spongy undergrowth off-trail. It was humanoid but enormous, at least twice the size of my own boot. I felt the hairs prickle on the back of my neck as I crouched to examine it. Since then, I started to question things I'd seen and heard over the years that I couldn't quite explain. The sensation of being watched as I hiked overgrown paths, glimpses of something tall and hair-covered darting between distant trees, inhuman shrieks piercing the night from some undetermined direction. I placed another log on the fire and double-checked that my cabin door was locked tight. Shadows flickered across the walls as I drifted into a restless sleep, wondering what exactly I was sharing these ancient forests with. Morning fog swirled through the dense understory as I set off on patrol at first light, a strong cup of black coffee steaming in my thermos. The strange events of recent months weighed heavily on my mind. I crested a ridge and gazed across the valley at the serrated Olympic peaks marching toward the horizon, gleaming white against a crimson sunrise. No matter how unsettled I felt, this landscape never failed to catch my breath and fill me with gratitude for my privileged existence out here. I'd grown up in a sprawling city, suffocating on exhaust fumes and listening to sirens wail at all hours. After serving a stint in the military, I stumbled across this park ranger position and never looked back. The solitude and physical demands of the job suited me. My native Squamish upbringing served me well in interpreting conditions and staying oriented off-trail. Some kind of primal instinct buried deep in my bones. The generous benefits and flexible schedule were an added bonus, allowing me to spend a few months each year back with my extended family on the reservation. Nieces and nephews would gather around wide-eyed as I spun larger-than-life tales of my adventures in the wild. just stories, I always reminded them with a smile. As I rounded a bend in the trail, I froze. Just ahead, a heavy mound of black fur lay motionless in the underbrush. My heart hammered against my ribs as I slowly approached. I let out a sigh of relief as I realized it was only a bear, likely a black bear cub from the size. But as I drew closer, relief curdled into horror. The bear had not died of natural causes. Its throat was slit from ear to ear, oozing dark blood onto the forest floor. No predator would make a kill like that. This was the work of something wielding a blade, or claws sharper than any beast I knew. I spun wildly, scanning the trees for any sign of the culprit. A twig snapped and I whirled toward the sound, heart thundering like a drum. There, just for a split second, I glimpsed a tall humanoid figure silently weaving between tree trunks before it vanished into the gloom. I stood rooted to the spot, ears ringing, hands shaking so violently I could barely grip my radio. After what felt like hours, I finally summoned my voice. Hello, this is Ranger Tahoma. I've got an animal mortality that appears to be unnatural causes. I'm roughly 4 miles up Graves Creek Trail. Over. I swallowed hard. How could I even begin to describe what I had seen? They'd think I'd lost my mind out here, alone in the wilderness all these years. Maybe they'd be right. By the time Fish and Wildlife officers hiked in to investigate, I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Animals could die in all sorts of grisly ways that could look sinister to the untrained eye. And that shadowy figure darting through the trees, likely just a trick of the light and an overactive imagination. The lead officer, an older man with a weathered face whom I'd worked with on poaching cases, cocked an eyebrow when he saw the carcass. "What do you think did this, Tahoma?" he asked, crouching down to inspect the precise cut across the bear's throat. His radio crackled, but he ignored it. I hesitated, unsure how much to divulge. At first glance, I thought it looked almost surgical, like the work of a hunter. But what kind of sicko would kill a cub like that and just leave it? He locked eyes with me, searching my face intently. "You see anything else unusual out here recently?" My mouth went dry. It was like he already knew I was holding something back. After an awkward pause, I decided to lay my cards on the table. "Actually, yeah, I glimpsed someone or something out here right after I found the carcass. Moved faster than any person I've ever seen. Didn't get a good look, but it was big." The officer sighed deeply and glanced around at the other wildlife personnel, now fanned out photographing the scene. He lowered his voice to barely a whisper. "Listen, Tahoma, you're not the first ranger to see weird shit out here you can't explain. Stuff that'd get you laughed out of service if you talked about it. But some of us know there are things in these woods that aren't in any wildlife manual." I stared at him, mouth agape, a million questions spinning through my mind. Before I could form words, he clapped me on the shoulder and called to his team that it was time to bag the carcass and hike out. "Watch your back out here, son," he said, then turned to follow his men down the winding trail. That night, alone in my cabin, the noises outside seemed magnified tenfold. Each hoot of an owl, each rustle of branches against the wooden walls made me start. I pored over my tattered collection of books on local indigenous folklore by lamplight, searching for any hint of the creatures that might roam the forests I called home. Tahoma, my namesake, represented the spirit of the great mountain, Mount Rainier. He loomed over the land as a guardian of nature in the stories of my Squamish ancestors. Powerful but benevolent if respected. What would he think of this presence lurking in his forests now? What ancient spirits had I unknowingly crossed? In the days following the dead bear incident, I threw myself into my work with a newfound zeal. I logged miles upon miles patrolling the backcountry, safety-proofing trails and campsites, documenting every wildlife sighting and sign I came across. Maybe if I focused hard enough on the daily tasks of rangering, I could forget the growing dread knotting in my stomach each time I stepped into the shelter of the trees. But the feeling of being watched never left me. The back of my neck prickled constantly, and I found myself whipping around at the slightest noise, scanning the undergrowth for any hint of movement. I started carrying a hunting knife on my belt, though I knew it would be useless against whatever creature had mutilated that bear. It didn't help that hikers and campers reported a string of strange occurrences, eerie noises echoing off the peaks at night, Food sacks ravaged by something strong enough to snap steel cables. Large rocks somehow moved to block trails that had been clear just hours before. At first, I did my best to assuage their concerns, suggesting that high winds were twisting the sounds of natural events into something sinister. But even I was running out of logical explanations, especially when a hysterical family flagged me down one evening, the father's shirt shredded across the back by something that had reached into their tent while they slept. I was called into park headquarters later that week for a hushed meeting with the superintendent and top rangers from neighboring districts. They danced around specifics, but the message was clear. Something was out there that defied reason, and it was escalating. Our top priority was avoiding a public relations nightmare by keeping a lid on the strange events. We received orders to step up patrols, keep campers in developed sites only, and investigate the rash of incidents, but to avoid any unnecessary details in our reports. Any staff who couldn't handle the pressure or uncertainty were given leave to transfer out, no questions asked. I sat silent throughout the meeting, a hot coal of anger starting to glow deep in my chest. How could they sweep this under the rug when real lives were at stake? When some mysterious creature was running rampant through land we were sworn to protect? That anger propelled me through the next few weeks as I pushed myself to the brink of exhaustion, determined to find answers. I interviewed old-timers, pored over yellowed newspaper archives at the local historical society, even listened through my aunt's crackling tape recording of Squamish elders recounting stories passed down for generations, straining to make out their hushed voices. Everywhere I turned, I caught glimpses and echoes of the same story, a huge ape-like creature that roamed the mountains and forests of the Pacific Northwest since time immemorial. They had many names, Sasquatch, Sayatic, Tsemekwes, but one comes up again and again, Bigfoot. At first I dismissed the notion as ludicrous. Bigfoot was a hokey cryptid, a guy in a gorilla suit starring in grainy films for late-night conspiracy show fodder. But the more I dug, the more the stories started to line up with the undeniable facts on the ground. Something very real was out there, and it was getting bolder. I was hiking back from a long and fruitless Bigfoot stakeout late one night, so exhausted I could barely lift my feet. It had been weeks since I'd gotten a full night's sleep or had a conversation that didn't revolve around the creature's latest antics. I felt like I was slowly losing my grip on reality, pouring all my time and money into an all-consuming obsession. The trees pressed close in the darkness, my headlamp barely cutting a dim path through the thick forest ahead of me. I was still miles from my cabin and longed for the warmth of my little wood stove, maybe even the comfort of another human voice on the staticky ranger radio. I was so absorbed in my own thoughts, I almost missed the rustling in the underbrush just off the trail. I swung my headlamp toward the sound, expecting to catch the glint of deer eyes. Instead, the beam landed on a huge humanoid figure, crouching in the shadows just a few yards away. My heart seized in my chest. It was shaped like a man but stood nearly 8 feet tall, its hulking frame covered in matted black hair. I could make out a heavy brow ridge casting its deep-set eyes into shadow, and a flat nose between two flaring nostrils, its hands curled into meaty clubs at the end of freakishly long and muscular arms. For a horrifying moment we just stared at each other, frozen. I thought I glimpsed something akin to puzzlement in its dark eyes, peering out from a startling human-like face. Then it lunged forward with blinding speed, and I was knocked to the ground, the wind crushed from my lungs. A pungent musk filled my nostrils as it pinned me effortlessly to the forest floor. I felt its hot breath on my neck as it leaned close, loose flaps of skin around its lips flaring. A scream rose in my throat, but I was too paralyzed with fear to release it. With a suddenness that made me gasp, the creature released me from its grip and rose to its full, towering height. It glanced around almost frantically as if looking for something, then crashed off into the underbrush with speed that shook the ground. Within seconds, the night was silence once more. I laid there panting for what felt like hours, trying to convince myself that I wasn't dead or dreaming. When I finally summoned the courage to sit up, I saw something carved into the damp earth where the creature had crouched. A symbol I recognized from the ancient books of Squamish lore. Translated to English, it meant only one word: danger. I barely remember dragging myself back to the cabin and barricading the door. I woke sprawled across my cot, my rifle locked and loaded on my chest. At first I couldn't separate the Bigfoot encounter from my confused and terrified dreams. The shadow of its hulking form seemed to loom from every corner of the Spartan one-room building. Coffee curdled in my stomach, but I forced myself to choke down a mug as I sat hunched over the kitchen table, digging through my notes with fresh eyes. The creature hadn't tried to kill me, even though it easily could have. It seemed more concerned with trying to communicate something urgent. I flipped through my great-grandfather's ancient tales of Tahoma, the mountain spirit, and his emissaries, supernatural beings who guarded the sacred forests and peaks. Sightings over the centuries reported them intervening in times of great change or strife, kicking violent hunters out of valleys, diverting hikers away from streams poisoned by mining runoff, even putting out the occasional wildfire long before modern emergency services. Could the Bigfoot I saw be trying to warn me of some looming danger to the park? My mind spun with catastrophic scenarios: an earthquake, catastrophic wildfire, or eruption of the sleeping volcano in the mountain's heart. I had to do something, even if it meant risking my career and reputation on what I'd seen. I radioed the superintendent and called an emergency all-staff meeting. I stayed up all night organizing my research, mounting the most compelling Bigfoot evidence on poster board to present. If I could make them understand the gravity of the situation, maybe we could work together with the creature sightings in mind to develop an emergency response and evacuation plan. The meeting was packed. Rangers and maintenance staff alike curious about the sudden summons. I ignored their puzzled glances and dove straight into my collected stories, grainy photos, and topographic maps marked with sightings and incidents. I held up the sketched Squamish symbol for danger, my hands shaking as I recounted my experience on the trail. "Look, I know how this sounds," I said, my voice growing hoarse, "but I'm telling you that whether we call it Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Tahoma, there's something very real and very powerful out there trying to warn us of an impending threat to the park." A heavy silence fell across the room. I stared at my colleagues beseechingly, praying for someone else to speak up with their own unexplained encounters. Finally, the superintendent stood, his chair scraping awkwardly on the linoleum. "Thank you for your report, Ranger Tahoma," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Your extra patrol efforts have been duly noted, and we commend your dedication to preparedness." He turned to address the room. "We'll be increasing helicopter surveillance of the backcountry and allocating funds for additional motion-triggered cameras. Meeting adjourned." The room emptied quickly, the staff avoiding my burning gaze. The superintendent approached me as I gathered my research with shaking hands. "Tahoma, I'm putting you on administrative leave, effective immediately. Take some time to rest." His tone softened, but his meaning was clear. They thought I'd lost my mind out here in the wilderness, chasing shadows and fairy tales. I trudged back to my cabin in a daze, at a loss for what to do next. I stepped through the door and started at the sight of a huge, dark shape hunched in the corner. The creature rose slowly to its full height, fixing me with that intense stare. Every instinct screamed for me to run, but a strange calm washed over me. Somehow I knew this being meant me no harm. It regarded me with what almost looked like respect. Before I continue with the story, I want to note that I will aim to maintain an eerie, suspenseful atmosphere while avoiding graphic depictions of violence or harm, as I believe effective horror relies more on the power of suggestion. I'll focus on building tension through the protagonist's inner thoughts and mounting dread rather than overt scares. Continuing from, "It regarded me with what almost looked like respect before." It regarded me with what almost looked like respect, before reaching one long arm up to tap a clawed finger against its temple, then gesturing to me. A chill rippled down my spine as I realized it wanted to communicate directly with my mind. I sat down slowly at the rough-hewn kitchen table, never taking my eyes from the creature. It mimicked my movements, folding itself into a crouch on the opposite side. I flinched as it reached across the gap and rested one leathery hand atop my own trembling palm. A jolt like electricity surged through me at the contact, and suddenly my mind flooded with images. Flashes of storms lashing the steep slopes, geysers of boiling water bursting from the once tranquil hot springs, trees exploding into flame from superheated plumes of volcanic gas. With the crystal clarity of a lucid dream, I watched a massive eruption rip the top off Mount Tahoma, filling the sky with choking ash, I saw bridges crumple into the roiling rivers like tinfoil, herds of charred and panicked elk fleeing through a landscape painted ochre and gray. Most terrible of all, though, were the scattered, broken human forms crumpled at campsites and trailheads, abandoned vehicles entombed in drifts of cinders. The mountain's unearthly power consumed indiscriminately, and I quailed before its destructive might. I blinked and was back in my cabin, gasping for breath, clammy sweat soaking my shirt. The creature continued to stare at me, eyes ancient and sad. Through my lingering mental link with it, I sensed that it grieved for the fate of its mountain, but was resolved to fulfill its duties as protector. With the slightest tilt of its great head, it impressed upon me that the only way to save lives would be to trigger the eruption before nature did so on its own chaotic terms. For a long moment we shared the heavy burden of that knowledge, an unspoken understanding passing between us. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it rose and stepped out into the night, vanishing into the shadows of the towering evergreens with preternatural silence. I slumped back in my chair, physically and emotionally drained, yet overfilled with purpose. Through my connection with the creature, my own heritage made manifest. I finally understood my role in the ancient pact between Tahoma and those who called its slopes home. I would not be believed, might even be blamed, but I had to sound the alarm and evacuate the park before the earth destroyed it in fire and fury. Whatever the personal cost, I would honor the guardianship passed down to me and do what must be done. My hands shook only slightly as I reached for the radio and prepared to make a call that would change everything. The time for secrets and doubt had passed. I would need every ounce of courage and conviction to convince them to heed the mountain's warning before it was too late. As the first rays of dawn broke over the undulating ridgelines, I whispered a prayer to the Great Spirit of Tahoma, asking for strength and guidance. Then I keyed up the radio and took a deep breath to steady my voice. "All stations, this is Ranger Tahoma. I have an emergency message requesting immediate evacuation of all park visitors and staff. I repeat, this is an emergency evacuation." Thus began the longest and most fateful day of my life, racing against time and the burning mountain. Though the journey ahead would be perilous, I took courage in knowing that I did not walk alone. The guardian of the forest would be with me every step of the way, two children of the crater, until our sacred task was complete. The warm summer air hung heavy as dusk settled over our quiet suburban neighborhood. It was a Friday evening in late July, about 6 months ago, when my life took an unexpected and terrifying turn. At the time, I was just 17 years old, enjoying what should have been a carefree summer before my senior year of high school. As usual, I found myself at my friend Jasper's house with our other buddies, Dominic and Tyler. The four of us had been inseparable since middle school, bonding over video games, sports, and the typical teenage pursuits. Jasper's parents were often away on business trips, making his spacious home our default hangout spot. That fateful night started innocently enough. We were sprawled across Jasper's basement rec room, engrossed in a heated multiplayer battle on his massive flat-screen TV. The only sounds were the clacking of controller buttons, occasional shouts of triumph or frustration, and the muffled thump of bass from the speakers. "Oh, come on," Tyler yelled suddenly, hurling his controller to the floor in a burst of anger after a particularly brutal defeat. The plastic cracked ominously against the hardwood. Jasper's eyes widened. "Dude, what the hell? That's my good controller." Tyler's face immediately fell, regret replacing his momentary rage. "Shit, man, I'm sorry. I don't know what came over me." An awkward silence descended as we all stared at the damaged controller. Finally, Tyler spoke up again. "Look, I feel terrible. How about we run to Walmart and I'll buy you a new one right now?" Jasper considered for a moment before nodding. "Yeah, all right. I guess we were probably going to end up there tonight anyway." It was true. Our weekend ritual often involved late-night Walmart runs, more for the aimless entertainment than any real shopping needs. Plus, there was a Taco Bell right next door, and none of us had eaten dinner yet. "I'm down," I chimed in, my stomach growling at the thought of food. "Dominic?" He shrugged, already reaching for his shoes. "Why not? Better than losing to you jerks again." We piled into Jasper's beaten-up Honda Civic, the car groaning under our combined weight. As we pulled out of the driveway, I had no idea that this mundane errand would set in motion a chain of events that would haunt me for months to come. The drive to Walmart was uneventful, filled with our usual banter and debates about music, movies, and girls. We made our purchases quickly, a replacement controller for Jasper and an assortment of snacks and energy drinks to fuel our planned all-nighter. Next door at Taco Bell, we devoured our food in the parking lot, windows down to combat the stuffy summer heat. As we finished up, Tyler leaned forward from the back seat, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Hey, you guys ever hear about that new shop over on Elm Street, the one that sells those special gummies?" I tensed immediately. Despite being a fairly typical teenager in most respects, I'd always steered clear of anything drug-related. It just wasn't my scene, and I'd seen how substance abuse had torn apart some families in our community. Dominic, however, perked up with interest. "Oh yeah, I think my cousin mentioned that place. Supposed to be pretty wild stuff." Jasper looked intrigued but hesitant. "I don't know, man. My mom's home tonight, and she'd kill me if she caught us with anything like that." I was about to voice my own objections when a thought occurred to me, one that I would come to regret deeply. "What about my family's cabin?" I suggested, surprising myself. "It's only about 20 minutes from here. We could check the place out, no parents around." The words had barely left my mouth before I wished I could take them back, but it was too late. The guys latched onto the idea with enthusiasm, and before I knew it, we were pulling into the parking lot of a nondescript strip mall. Tyler hopped out of the car, a wad of cash in hand that we'd all contributed to. "Be right back," he called over his shoulder, disappearing into a shop with blacked-out windows. As we waited, a sense of unease began to settle over me. The darkened storefronts, the empty parking lot, the distant sound of a train whistle. It all felt ominous somehow, as if the night itself was trying to warn us away from the path we were choosing. Tyler returned a few minutes later, a small paper bag clutched tightly in his fist. His eyes were wide with excitement. "Got him," he announced, sliding back into the car. "Let's get out of here." As Jasper started the engine, I gave him directions to the cabin. With each mile that passed, my anxiety grew. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were making a terrible mistake, that we were about to cross a line we couldn't uncross. The gravel crunched beneath the tires as Jasper's car crawled up the winding driveway to my family's cabin. Towering pines loomed on either side, their branches seeming to reach out like gnarled fingers in the gloom. As we rounded the final bend, the cabin came into view, a dark silhouette against the star-studded sky. "This is it," I announced, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet car. The cabin itself was nothing special, a modest, single-story structure built by my grandfather in the 1970s. It had been modernized over the years, but still retained a rustic charm. To the right of the main building stood a weathered wooden shed where we stored ATVs and other outdoor equipment. As we exited the car, the cool night air hit me like a slap to the face. A shiver ran down my spine, and not just from the temperature drop. An inexplicable feeling of dread washed over me, as if unseen eyes were watching our every move. I scanned the tree line, my gaze lingering on the shadows between the trunks. For a split second, I thought I saw movement, a flash of something pale darting behind the shed. I blinked, and it was gone. "You okay, man?" Dominic asked, noticing my distraction. I shook my head, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just tired, I guess. Come on, let's head inside." The cabin's interior was exactly as I remembered it. A small living room straight ahead, a kitchenette and bunk room to the left, and a bedroom and bathroom to the right. It smelled of pine and old leather, a comforting scent that momentarily eased my nerves. As soon as the door closed behind us, Tyler produced the bag of gummies with a flourish. "Who's ready to party?" Jasper and Dominic eagerly reached for the treats, but I held back. "I think I'll pass," I said. "Someone needs to stay sober to drive us home later." The others nodded, accepting my decision without argument. As they divvied up the gummies, I busied myself turning on lights and checking that we had everything we needed for the night. About half an hour passed before the effects began to show. Dominic was the first, dissolving into fits of giggles at the slightest provocation. Jasper wasn't far behind, his eyes taking on a glassy, unfocused look as he swayed to music only he could hear. Tyler, surprisingly, seemed largely unaffected. He watched the others with an amused expression, occasionally joining in their laughter but maintaining his composure. As the night wore on, I found myself growing increasingly on edge. Every creak of the old cabin's timbers, every rustle of leaves outside sent my heart racing. I tried to rationalize my fear. It was just an unfamiliar place, just the wind, just my imagination running wild. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Something felt fundamentally wrong, as if the very air around us had become charged with malevolent energy. Around 2 a.m., the initial euphoria began to wear off. Jasper stumbled into the bedroom on the right, collapsing onto the bed without even removing his shoes. Dominic sprawled across the living room couch, his snores soon filling the air. Tyler stood up, stretching languidly. "Think I'm going to go sit in the car for a bit," he announced. "Clear my head, listen to some tunes." I nodded absently, too tired to argue. As the door clicked shut behind him, I made my way to the bunk room, desperate for some rest. Lying in the darkness, I stared at the ceiling, willing sleep to come. Just as I was about to drift off, a sound jolted me back to full alertness. A soft, insistent tapping at the window. Tap, tap, tap. My breath caught in my throat as I slowly turned my head towards the source of the noise. The window was a black void, revealing nothing of what might be lurking outside. Tap, tap, tap. Gathering my courage, I sat up, eyes straining to penetrate the darkness beyond the glass. For a moment, I thought I saw something. A pale, elongated face pressed against the pane. But when I blinked, it was gone. The tapping had stopped, but my heart continued to race. I told myself it was just a branch in the wind, just my overtired mind playing tricks on me. But a part of me knew better. A part of me sensed the malevolent presence that had followed us to this isolated spot, waiting for its moment to strike. As I lay back down, my phone suddenly burst to life, the ringtone shattering the oppressive silence. With trembling hands, I answered the call. "Hello?" I whispered. "Hey, sport." My father's voice, normally a source of comfort, now sent a chill down my spine. "Saw on the trail cams you boys are down at the cabin. Just wanted to let you know I might come by in the morning to do some hunting. Could you get my bow ready?" I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "Sure, Dad, I can do that." "Thanks, son. See you in the morning." As the call ended, I sat frozen in place, my mind reeling. Trail cameras. My father had seen us arrive, but if that was the case, what else might those cameras have captured? With shaking legs, I forced myself out of bed. I had to warn the others, had to make sure we were all safe and accounted for. But as I reached for the doorknob, a sound from outside stopped me dead in my tracks. A low, guttural growl, unlike anything I'd ever heard before. And then a scream, unmistakably human, unmistakably terrified. My hand froze on the doorknob, paralyzed by the inhuman sound that had shattered the night silence. The scream that followed sent ice through my veins. It was Tyler's voice, distorted by terror and pain. Adrenaline surged through me, momentarily overriding my fear. I yanked the door open and burst into the main room of the cabin. Dominic was already on his feet, his eyes wide with confusion and alarm. "What the hell was that?" he demanded, his voice trembling. Before I could answer, a rhythmic thudding sound came from the front door. Someone or something was trying to get in. "Tyler?" I called out, hoping against hope that it was just our friend returning from the car. "Is that you?" The pounding stopped abruptly. For a moment, silence reigned. Then a voice spoke. Tyler's voice, but wrong somehow. Hollow, lifeless. "Let me in," it said, the words slithering through the cracks around the door. "It's cold out here." Every instinct in my body screamed danger. Whatever was outside, it wasn't Tyler. Not anymore. "We need to get out of here," I whispered urgently to Dominic. "Wake Jasper, I'll grab what we need." As Dominic hurried to rouse our sleeping friend, I racked my brain for a plan. The car keys were in Tyler's pocket, wherever he was now. We were trapped. Then I remembered. My father's hunting gear. The bow he'd asked me to prepare, and more importantly, the shotgun he kept locked in the bedroom closet. I sprinted for the bedroom, my heart pounding in my ears. Behind me, I could hear the thing outside speaking again, its Tyler voice becoming more insistent, more angry. "Let me in." Each word was punctuated by a blow to the door, the wood groaning under the assault. I fumbled with the closet's combination lock, my sweaty fingers slipping on the dial. Come on, I muttered, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. Finally, the lock clicked open. I grabbed the shotgun and a box of shells, then ran back to the main room. Jasper was awake now, barely, his eyes unfocused and confused. "What's going on?" he slurred. "No time to explain," I said, shoving shells into the shotgun with shaking hands. "We need to—" My words were cut off by an ear-splitting crack. The front door burst inward, wood splinters flying through the air, and there, silhouetted in the doorway, was a nightmare made flesh. The creature was vaguely humanoid, but grotesquely elongated. Its limbs were too long, too thin, skin pulled tight over visible bones. But it was the face that seared itself into my memory, a featureless expanse of pale, waxy flesh, save for a gaping maw filled with rows of needle-sharp teeth. For a heartbeat, we all stood frozen, prey in the presence of a predator. Then the thing lunged forward with impossible speed, its clawed hands reaching for Dominic. I raised the shotgun and fired without thinking. The blast was deafening in the confined space of the cabin. The creature staggered backward, dark ichor oozing from wounds in its chest. But it didn't fall. Instead, it let out a sound, part scream, part roar, that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. "Run!" I yelled, chambering another round. "Get to the shed!" Dominic and Jasper didn't need to be told twice. They bolted for the door, squeezing past the wounded but still very much alive monster. I fired again, the recoil slamming into my shoulder, and then turned to follow my friends. The cool night air hit me like a slap as I sprinted across the yard. Behind me I could hear the creature recovering, its inhuman shrieks spurring me to run faster than I ever had before. The shed loomed ahead, a dark haven that promised some measure of safety. Dominic reached it first, wrenching the door open. Jasper was right behind him. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. The thing was gaining on me, moving with a fluid grace that belied its grotesque form. In the moonlight, I could see its face more clearly now, or rather the lack of a face. Where eyes should have been, there were only sunken hollows, somehow more terrifying than any gaze could have been. I dove through the shed door, Dominic slamming it shut behind me. We pressed our bodies against it, feeling the impact as the creature slammed into the other side. "What is that thing?" Jasper whimpered, huddled in a corner. I shook my head, gasping for breath. "I don't know, but we need to find a way out of here." The pounding on the door intensified. Wood splintered. It was only a matter of time before our barricade gave way. As I frantically searched the shed for anything we could use as a weapon, my eyes fell on a dusty tarp in the corner, and beneath it, the outline of something that might just save our lives. "The ATV," I breathed. "If we can get it started." Understanding dawned in Dominic's eyes. A chance to outrun that, whatever it is. I nodded grimly. "It's our only shot." As we moved to uncover the vehicle, the creature outside let out another bone-chilling cry. But this time there was something else mixed in with the inhuman shriek, a word spoken in Tyler's voice, dripping with malice. "Found you." The old ATV groaned to life beneath me, its engine sputtering and coughing like an ancient beast roused from slumber. Jasper and Dominic clung to me desperately, their fingers digging into my sides as I revved the throttle. "Hold on!" I shouted over the engine's roar, and then we were moving. The shed's wooden door exploded inward just as we burst through it, showering us with splinters. I caught a glimpse of the creature's grotesque form lunging towards us, its elongated arms reaching out with inhuman speed. But we were already careening down the hill, the ATV bouncing violently over the uneven terrain. The cool night air whipped past us as we plunged into the cornfield at the base of the hill. Tall stalks whipped at our faces and arms, leaving stinging welts in their wake. Behind us, I could hear the creature's unearthly shriek of frustration, followed by the sound of vegetation being torn apart as it gave chase. "It's following us," Jasper yelled, his voice tight with terror. I didn't dare look back, focusing all my attention on navigating through the maze-like rows of corn. The ATV's headlight cut a narrow swath through the darkness, barely illuminating the path ahead. Every decision had to be made in a split second, left or right, straight or turn. One wrong move could send us crashing, or worse, into the clutches of the monstrosity pursuing us. As we burst out of the cornfield and onto an old dirt road, I finally chanced a glance over my shoulder. The creature was loping after us on all fours, moving with a speed that defied its gangly frame. In the moonlight, its pale skin seemed to glow with an unholy luminescence. "It's gaining on us!" Dominic screamed, his fingers digging painfully into my ribs. I twisted the throttle as far as it would go, willing the old ATV to give us more speed. The engine whined in protest, but we began to pull ahead. For a moment I dared to hope we might outrun the thing. Then, without warning, the dirt road ended, giving way to thick underbrush. I had a split second to make a decision, try to plow through the vegetation or veer off into the woods. In that moment of hesitation, disaster struck. The ATV's front wheel caught on an exposed root, sending us into a violent spin. We were thrown clear of the vehicle, tumbling painfully across the forest floor. I landed hard on my back, the wind knocked out of me. Through a haze of pain, I saw the ATV continue its trajectory, slamming into a tree with a sickening crunch of metal. For a few seconds, all I could hear was a high-pitched ringing in my ears and the ragged sound of my own breathing. Then gradually other noises filtered in, the groans of my friends, the distant hoot of an owl, and silence. No sign of our pursuer. "Everyone okay?" I managed to croak out, pushing myself to a sitting position. "I think I broke my arm," Jasper whimpered from somewhere to my left. I'm all right," Dominic said, his voice shaky. "Where is it? Did we lose it?" As if in answer to his question, a blood-curdling howl echoed through the forest. It was close, too close. "We need to move," I said, scrambling to my feet despite the protests of my battered body. "Can you guys walk?" Jasper and Dominic nodded, both pale and wide-eyed with fear. I helped Jasper to his feet, wincing at his sharp intake of breath as he cradled his injured arm. "Which way?" Dominic asked, scanning the dark woods around us. I looked up, trying to orient myself by the stars peeking through the canopy. "This way," I said, pointing. "If we can make it to the highway, maybe we can flag down a car." We set off at as quick a pace as we could manage, every snapping twig and rustling leaf sending jolts of panic through us. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees looming like silent sentinels in the gloom. More than once I thought I caught glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes of stumbling through the undergrowth, we came to a small clearing. In the center stood an old, dilapidated barn, its weathered boards silvered by moonlight. "Should we hide in there?" Jasper asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated. The barn offered shelter, a place to catch our breath and potentially find something to use as a weapon, but it could also be a trap, leaving us cornered if the creature found us. Before I could make a decision, a twig snapped loudly behind us. We whirled around, hearts pounding. There, at the edge of the clearing, stood the creature. Its eyeless face was turned towards us, its mouth stretched in a horrific parody of a grin. "Inside now," I yelled, shoving my friends towards the barn. We sprinted across the clearing, the sound of the creature's pounding footsteps spurring us on. I reached the barn door first, yanking it open and ushering Jasper and Dominic inside. As I moved to follow them, I felt something grab my ankle. I looked down to see a pale, elongated hand wrapped around my leg, its grip like iron. The creature's face loomed behind it, its mouth opening to reveal row upon row of needle-sharp teeth. In that moment, staring into the abyss of its maw, I was certain I was about to die. Time seemed to slow as I stared into the nightmarish face of our pursuer, its grip on my ankle unwavering. The creature's mouth gaped wider, a fetid stench washing over me. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I kicked out with my free leg, my foot connecting solidly with what passed for the thing's jaw. There was a sickening crunch, and suddenly I was free. I scrambled backwards into the barn, Dominic and Jasper slamming the heavy wooden door shut behind me. "Help me barricade it," I gasped, pushing myself to my feet. We worked frantically, dragging old farm equipment and rotting bales of hay against the door. Outside, we could hear the creature's inhuman shrieks of rage, punctuated by the sound of claws scraping against wood. "Will it hold?" Jasper asked, cradling his injured arm. I shook my head grimly. "Not for long. We need to find another way out." The interior of the barn was pitch black, save for thin slivers of moonlight peeking through gaps in the walls. The air was thick with the musty smell of old hay and animal droppings. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I could make out the vague shapes of old farming tools hanging on the walls. "Grab anything we can use as a weapon," I instructed, reaching for a rusted pitchfork. Dominic found an ancient-looking axe, while Jasper, hampered by his broken arm, managed to pick up a heavy wrench. We huddled together in the center of the barn, weapons raised, as the pounding on the door intensified. "What is that thing?" Jasper whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't know," I replied honestly, "but it's not going to stop until it gets us." As if to emphasize my point, there was a tremendous crash as part of the barricade gave way. A long, pale arm snaked through the gap, clawed fingers grasping at the air. "Up there," Dominic hissed, pointing to a ladder leading to a hayloft. "We might be able to get out through the roof." It was our only chance. We scrambled for the ladder, Jasper going first despite his injury. I brought up the rear, swinging the pitchfork at the creature's probing arm. There was a shriek of pain as the tines connected, and the arm withdrew. We reached the hayloft, just as the barricade finally gave way completely. The creature burst into the barn, its eyeless face turning up towards us. For a moment it seemed confused, sniffing the air like a predator seeking its prey. Then, with horrifying agility, it began to scale the wall, using its long limbs to pull itself up towards our position. "The roof!" I yelled, spotting a section of rotted boards. "We can break through." Dominic attacked the weak spot with his axe, wood splintering under each blow. Jasper and I watched the creature's ascent with growing terror. It was halfway up the wall now, moving with unnatural speed. "Hurry," Jasper pleaded. With a final mighty swing, Dominic broke through. Cool night air rushed in through the hole. "Go," he shouted, helping Jasper up and out. I turned to follow them, but a sharp pain in my leg stopped me short. Looking down, I saw one of the creature's hands wrapped around my calf, its claws digging into my flesh. I cried out in pain and fear, desperately kicking at the monster's face. "Help!" I screamed, feeling myself being dragged towards the edge of the loft. Dominic reappeared at the hole in the roof, his eyes wide with horror. Without hesitation, he swung the axe down, aiming for the creature's arm. There was a sickening thud, followed by an otherworldly howl of pain. The grip on my leg loosened, and I scrambled away. Dominic hauled me up onto the roof where Jasper was waiting, pale and shaking. Below us, we could hear the creature thrashing about, its shrieks of rage echoing through the night. "We need to get down and run," I panted, trying to ignore the burning pain in my leg. "It'll find a way up here soon." We made our way carefully across the slanted roof, the old shingles creaking ominously beneath our weight. At the edge, we found a stack of old crates that offered a precarious but manageable way down. As we descended, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The woods around the barn seemed alive with shadows, each one potentially hiding another monster waiting to pounce. We had just reached the ground when a thunderous crash came from inside the barn. The creature had found its way onto the roof. "Run!" I yelled, pushing my friends ahead of me. We plunged into the forest, branches whipping at our faces as we ran blindly through the undergrowth. Behind us, I could hear the sound of pursuit, the snapping of twigs, the rustling of leaves, and worst of all, the rhythmic pounding of inhuman feet. As we ran, a new sound reached my ears, the distant rumble of traffic, the highway. If we could reach it, we might have a chance. "This way," I gasped, angling our course towards the noise. We burst out of the tree line onto the shoulder of the road just as a pair of headlights appeared in the distance. I stepped out onto the asphalt, waving my arms frantically. The truck's horn blared as it approached, but it began to slow. For a moment, hope surged through me. We were going to make it. Then Jasper screamed. I turned to see the creature emerging from the woods, its eyeless face fixed on us with terrifying purpose. It began to lope towards us with impossible speed. The truck was almost upon us now. In a split second, I had to make a decision that would determine whether we lived or died. I stepped directly into the path of the oncoming vehicle. The screech of tires filled the air as the truck driver slammed on his brakes. I stood my ground, heart pounding, praying that the vehicle would stop in time. Behind me, I could hear the rapid approach of the creature, its inhuman growls growing louder with each passing second. At the last possible moment, I dove to the side. The truck roared past, missing me by inches. There was a sickening thud, followed by an unearthly shriek of pain and rage. I rolled onto my back, gasping for air to see the creature sprawled across the asphalt. The truck had struck it dead on, but incredibly, it was still moving. Its limbs twisted at unnatural angles as it struggled to right itself, dark ichor oozing from countless wounds. The truck skidded to a halt about 50 yards down the road. Its driver, a middle-aged man with a look of utter shock on his face, stumbled out of the cab. "What the hell was that?" he yelled, his voice shaking. "Are you kids all right?" Before I could answer, the creature let out another bone-chilling cry. It had managed to pull itself upright, its broken body swaying grotesquely. Its eyeless face turned towards us, mouth opening to reveal rows of jagged teeth. "Get back in your truck," I shouted to the driver. "We need to go now." The man didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled back into his vehicle as Jasper, Dominic, and I raced towards the passenger side. We piled into the cab just as the creature began to lurch in our direction. "Drive!" Dominic yelled. The truck's engine roared to life, tires spinning on the asphalt as we accelerated away. In the side mirror, I could see the creature giving chase, moving with surprising speed despite its injuries. "What is that thing?" the driver asked, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "We don't know," I replied, my voice hoarse, "but it's been chasing us all night." "Jesus Christ," the man muttered, pressing harder on the accelerator. For several tense minutes we sped down the highway, the creature gradually falling behind. Eventually it disappeared from view entirely. Only then did I allow myself to relax slightly, the adrenaline that had been keeping me going starting to ebb away. "We need to get to the police," Jasper said, wincing as he shifted his broken arm. The driver nodded. "There's a state trooper station about 10 miles up the road. We'll go there." As we drove, I filled the man in on the night's events, leaving out the part about the gummies. He listened in stunned silence, occasionally shaking his head in disbelief. "I've been driving these roads for 20 years, he said when I finished. "Never seen anything like that before. You kids are lucky to be alive." I nodded grimly, knowing just how close we had come to death. The image of the creature's eyeless face and gaping maw was seared into my memory, a nightmare that I knew would haunt me for years to come. We reached the state trooper station without further incident. The fluorescent-lit interior felt surreal after the horrors we had faced in the dark woods. The troopers on duty listened to our story with a mix of skepticism and concern, particularly when they saw Jasper's broken arm and the claw marks on my leg. They dispatched units to search the area where we had encountered the creature, but I knew in my heart they wouldn't find anything. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't something that would allow itself to be captured or killed so easily. As dawn broke, casting a pale light over the world, our parents arrived at the station. There were tears, hugs, and a barrage of questions that we were too exhausted to fully answer. In the days and weeks that followed, we were interviewed by various authorities, local police, state troopers, even a pair of FBI agents who seemed particularly interested in our description of the creature. But no trace of it was ever found save for some strange tracks and claw marks on the old barn. Jasper, Dominic, and I made a pact to never speak of that night to anyone else. Who would believe us anyway? But in quiet moments, when the memory of that eyeless face and reaching claws becomes too much to bear, we find comfort in each other's company, in the shared knowledge of what we faced and survived. As for me, I've never returned to that cabin in the woods. Some nights I wake in a cold sweat, certain that I can hear the tap, tap, tap of bony fingers on my window. And always I wonder, what if it's still out there, waiting in the darkness for its next victims? The brisk winter air nipped at my nose as I stepped off the old school bus and into the snow-covered camping grounds of Bass River State Forest. At 10 years old, I was filled with a sense of adventure at the prospect of spending 3 days in the wilderness with my classmates. Little did I know, this trip would forever change my life and how I saw the world. Our teachers quickly divided us up into groups and set us to work pitching tents and gathering firewood. As I hammered tent pegs into the frozen earth alongside my best friend Allison, an eerie sensation washed over me, as if unseen eyes were boring into the back of my skull from the shadowy tree line. I tried to shake it off, reasoning that there were bound to be plenty of animals watching us from the woods. Just then, a bone-chilling howl echoed through the forest, unlike anything I had ever heard before. It sounded almost human, but with an unmistakably lupine timbre, that made the hairs on my arms stand on end beneath my thick coat sleeves. Startled, I dropped my hammer into the snow. "Did you hear that?" I asked Allison, my voice quavering. She shrugged. "Probably just a wolf or coyote. Nothing to worry about out here." But I wasn't so sure. There was something profoundly unnatural about the sound that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Still, not wanting to seem like a scaredy cat in front of my peers, I tried to put the disturbing occurrence out of my mind and focus on enjoying the trip. The rest of the day passed uneventfully as we finished setting up camp, cooked dinner over the campfire, and engaged in typical childhood camping activities. But as hard as I tried, I couldn't fully ignore the lingering sense of unease that had taken root in the pit of my stomach. It was as if some primordial intuition was warning me of an unseen danger lurking just beyond the reach of the firelight. As the sun dipped below the tree line and the temperatures plummeted, we all gathered close around the warmth of the roaring campfire to roast marshmallows and tell spooky stories. For a time I was able to lose myself in the camaraderie and forget my earlier trepidation. But as the hours ticked by and the flames began to dwindle, it became clear that we would need to venture back into the woods to restock our supply of firewood. Not wanting to show fear in front of my classmates, I volunteered to search the most foreboding section of forest, figuring my boldness would impress them. Allison shot me a concerned look. "Are you sure, Jess? Maybe we should stick together." I waved off her worry with a devil-may-care grin that belied the hammering of my heart. "I'll be fine, back before you know it." Tramping into the woods alone, I began picking up branches and twigs, the icy air burning my lungs with each breath. But after about 10 minutes, an eerie realization dawned on me. The forest was completely silent. No hooting owls, no skittering night creatures, not even the sighing of wind through bare branches. A deafening, all-consuming silence pressed in around me. Just as I registered this unnerving absence of sound, a twig snapped like a gunshot somewhere back in the tree line, shattering the oppressive quiet. I leapt nearly a foot in the air, my heart ricocheting against my rib cage. "Hello?" I called out, my voice faltering. "Anybody there?" To my horror, rather than an answering shout from a classmate, my own words echoed back to me from the darkness, but warped and sharpened into something utterly inhuman. It was as if some unseen creature was mockingly parroting me in a grotesque imitation of human speech. Blind panic seized me. Dropping my armload of sticks, I whirled around and sprinted back toward the direction of camp, heedless of the branches that whipped across my face. But with each stretch of distance I covered, I could hear the distinct sound of footsteps crashing through the underbrush behind me, rapidly gaining ground. After a few endless minutes, I risked a glance over my shoulder, hoping to see nothing more than a classmate playing a prank. Instead, my blood turned to ice in my veins. There, shuffling between the trees on legs like a man's but covered in shaggy fur, was a hulking creature, a nightmarish hybrid of beast and human. Its huge lupine head was crowned with a twisting rack of antlers, and its yawning jaws were lined with dagger-like teeth that glinted in the moonlight. But what truly froze me to my core was the expression on its grotesque face, a perverse grin of cruel amusement and malevolent hunger. It was toying with me. Adrenaline surged through my system, and I ran as I had never run before, vaulting over fallen logs and crashing through walls of thorny underbrush, heedless of the bloody scratches that crisscrossed my skin. Rasping breaths tore from my throat and my pulse thundered in my ears, but still I pushed myself faster, spurred on by the primal certainty that if the creature caught me, a far worse fate than mere death awaited. After what felt like an eternity, I spotted the welcome glow of the campfire through a gap in the trees. Putting on a final burst of speed, I crashed back into the circle of firelight, collapsing at Allison's feet as exhausted sobs racked my numb body. "Jess, what happened?" she cried, kneeling down and gripping my shoulders. "What's wrong?" Through my tears, I tried to choke out a description of the abomination I had seen, but as I met the circle of confused and concerned faces surrounding me, I knew there was no way they would believe such an outlandish tale. They would think I was crazy or lying for attention. A wolf," I finally managed. "I saw a huge wolf." And then the abyss of unconsciousness rose up and dragged me down into blessed oblivion. I woke late the next morning, safe in my tent, but with a throbbing headache and a heart still gripped by dread. The primal terror of the previous night still seared through my mind, eclipsing any notion that it could have simply been a bad dream or my imagination running away with me. I knew to the marrow of my bones that the antlered abomination had been real and was still out there. I tried to rejoin my classmates as they cooked breakfast and chattered about the day's planned activities, but my participation felt hollow and forced. All I could focus on was the suffocating knowledge that something unutterably evil lurked in those woods, and the all-consuming fear that I would encounter it again. Unable to drum up any sincere interest in hiking or crafts, I mumbled an excuse about not feeling well and retreated to my tent, where I spent the day huddled in my sleeping bag, jumping at every distant sound that filtered through the nylon walls. Allison tried several times to coax me out, but I stubbornly refused, mentally counting down the hours until we would leave this place, and I could try to convince myself it had all been a stress-induced hallucination. The bus ride home passed in a dissociative fog, with the excited voices of my classmates fading to a muffled buzz in my ears. It wasn't until I stumbled through my front door and collapsed into my mother's startled arms that I finally let myself break down, sobbing out an incoherent account of what I had experienced between hiccuping breaths. But seeing the distressed confusion in her eyes, I realized that even my own mother couldn't bring herself to believe my claims about the twisted man-beast in the woods. So I did the only thing I could do. I clammed up, pretending that I had simply gotten worked up over a regular wolf. Everyone knew wolves hadn't been seen in New Jersey in close to a century, but it was still a far more plausible story than the truth, and so that became the official narrative, shared with teachers and classmates and parents, that frightful Jessie had merely been spooked by a wayward wolf or overactive imagination. But deep down that little girl knew the truth, and as I grew older I never forgot. 15 years have passed since that terrible night in Bass River State Forest. On the surface, I've moved on with my life, graduated high school, earned a biology degree, started a promising career in wildlife conservation. But even as I grew into a successful, well-adjusted adult, that primordial terror lingered deep within my psyche, forever tainting my relationship with the natural world I had once loved so fiercely. I still venture out into the wilderness as part of my job, but never alone and never at night. A once bold child has been replaced by a wary, hyper-vigilant woman who can never fully shake the feeling of being watched from the shadows. Childhood camping trips are a thing of the distant past, and even casual hikes are undertaken with a grim sense of necessity rather than joyful exploration. But despite my unshakable paranoia, I've never encountered another hint of that nightmarish creature, not even a prickling of déjà vu or a far-off howl that burrows into my shaken bones. As the years ticked by without incident, I started to desperately hope that maybe, just maybe, it had all been the invention of a frightened little girl's mind after all. A mental trick of the light combined with winter boredom and too many ghost stories. But deep down, beneath the comforting lies I tell myself, I know the truth. It's still out there. The faint hope that maybe I truly had imagined the whole terrifying ordeal was forever shattered during a weekend research trip to northern Maine. I was assisting with a study on the ecological impacts of the state's burgeoning black bear population, which meant long days trekking through remote stretches of forest looking for signs of their presence. On the third day, as dusk bled from the sky and I hurried to wrap up my final transect before nightfall, a shiver abruptly ran up my spine, and I froze mid-step. The woods around me had gone deathly silent, just as they had that night 15 years before. And in that oppressive hush broken only by my ragged breathing, I heard it. A long, low howl undulating through the trees like a death knell, with cadences of agonized human screaming woven through its lupine sonority. And I knew that howl. Even after all this time, even with hundreds of miles between me and my childhood trauma, I would never forget that sound for as long as I lived. Abandoning my equipment without a second thought, I turned and bolted back toward the distant field station, not caring about the branches that tore at my face or the burning of my lungs as I gasped for air. Behind me, rapidly gaining, came the familiar snap of twigs and crunch of heavy footfalls. What happened next is a blur of pure, visceral terror, time fragmented and dilated, seconds stretched into lifetimes. The trees flashed by in a shadowed fever dream as I pushed my body to the brink of collapse. I have brief flashes of bursting from the tree line into the grassy clearing of the station, of collapsing against the door as I frantically typed in the entry code with numb, fumbling fingers, of slamming the reinforced door behind me just as a dark shape lunged from the woods in my peripheral vision. My team found me hours later, still pressed against the door in a near catatonic state. I had no idea how to even begin explaining my actions or the reason for my obvious terror. Luckily, in my panicked flight, I appeared to have severely twisted my ankle. In my distressed state, I let them believe my fear stemmed from the pain and the encroaching night, and once again kept the true horror to myself. That was nearly 5 years ago. Since then, the twisted creature that first shattered my innocence seems to be actively stalking me through my life, a malevolent shadow permanently seared into my psyche. I've heard its telltale howl on a trail in Washington's Hoh rainforest, felt its hungry presence watching me from a copse of trees at the edge of Shenandoah National Park. It never reveals itself fully, but I know it's there, waiting, haunting. The unrelenting paranoia has taken a steep toll. Formerly close friendships have withered under the strain of my mercurial moods and constant guardedness. A promising romance with a fellow conservationist fell apart in the face of my emotional distance and the unpredictable intensity of my reactions to seemingly benign situations. Even my parents have expressed concern over my mental state, though I still haven't been able to bring myself to tell them the full truth. I've thought about checking myself into psychiatric treatment, but I know a shrink would never believe my claims about the creature. They'd diagnose me with PTSD or schizophrenia, put me on a drug regimen and send me to counseling. But that wouldn't stop the thing in the woods.